Pokémon, medicine and martial arts. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction, so please don't attempt real magic. The results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 826 Oolong. They saw it as each other's fault. If the other hadn't been constantly pushing in, they wouldn't have been completely driven out. This allowed them to be closer to their trainer, especially since their trainer was in such a state and needed their warmth even more. Charizard felt it was the perfect choice. After all, their embrace was the warmest. Just kidding, that big belly wasn't just for show, right? It wasn't a burden that detracted from their handsome looks, it was a divine tool that comforted and warmed their master. The commotion quickly drew the attention of Yu and the surrounding Pokémon. Even Moltres, who had been feigning sleep in the hospital bed, was no exception. Curious eyes turned to Gyarados and Charizard, genuinely puzzled as to what these two were up to. Faced with a sudden silence in the ward, the silent battle between Gyarados and Charizard suddenly lost its quietness. Even the smallest sound was loud in the empty, quiet room. At that moment, Gyarados' body was entangled with Charizard's tail. Perhaps due to both being injured, they could only compete secretly, each exerting their utmost strength, hoping to subdue the other and completely subdue him. However, both Pokémon were not only enormous in size but also immensely powerful. Neither of them was to be trifled with. Although it was merely a contest of strength, neither was victorious. The two massive bodies continued to twist and turn. Even with this sudden silence, Gyarados and Charizard had recovered from the stares, but their inertia kept them locked in a struggle. However, this gave the impression that the two Pokémon were not competing, each vying for closer proximity to their trainer. Instead, it gave the impression of a close and intimate relationship. Even now, even though they hadn't recovered, they were still entangled in such a passionate embrace. Seeing the complex expressions on their companions' faces and their trainers' twitching lips, Gyarados and Charizard finally reacted and tried to control their bodies to separate. However, due to the tight entanglement, the two Pokémon were unable to separate instantly. Instead, due to their somewhat inconsistent coordination, they were once again entangled in a mess. As a result of this mutual relay, the entanglement between the two Pokémon became even tighter. They even began to move left and right, hoping to separate instantly, but because of the sudden lack of separation, they were instantly entangled again. This is how the following scene unfolded. At this moment, Gyarados' massive body was pinned down by Charizard. The two Pokémon's mouths were directly facing each other. Both Pokémon were stunned, and not just the surrounding Pokémon but also Yu, the trainer, who was equally stunned after witnessing this scene. Yu instinctively reached out and covered Snorlax's large, curious eyes, which were watching the scene before them. This reaction was completely unconscious. Snorlax had only recently hatched, so it was still in its infancy, not yet fully grown, and therefore still a minor Pokémon. How could its young, pure heart be subjected to such filth? Although Yu instinctively covered Snorlax's eyes, no matter how tightly he closed his hand, there was still a gap between his fingers. Through the gaps between his fingers, Snorlax naturally saw what Yu considered to be a rather filthy scene before him. He immediately stared with curiosity at the scene unfolding before him. His round eyes widening with curiosity. Blinking his eyes, Snorlax was genuinely confused. What on earth were Charizard and Gyarados doing? Why was Charizard's head stuffed into Gyarados' mouth? It was just such a strange phenomenon, so why did the master cover his eyes? Could it be a warning to him to never eat a Gyarados or Charizard again, no matter how greedy he became? Thinking of this, Snorlax blinked again, and as if he had figured it all out, a happy smile appeared on his face. Master, how can you be so worried about this little thing? I definitely won't become like these two seniors when the time comes. Unlike Snorlax's innocent mind, Yu and the surrounding Pokémon were stunned. What was going on? Charizard was shoving itself into Gyarados' mouth. And judging by the way Gyarados looked, it was clear he was going to swallow Charizard alive. This was unbearable. Yu immediately became anxious. I hadn't imagined that simply being in a daze would cause two Pokémon to devour each other. Indeed, at this moment, under the gazes of both of them, I expected a filthy scene to ensue, as Gyarados and Charizard locked lips. Suddenly, however, something unexpected happened. Gyarados was quite large, its maw wide open, the size of Charizard's head. As you can imagine, it was impossible for the two mouths to meet. Even if Charizard opened its mouth as wide as it could, it was like an adult and a child in front of Gyarados. In a moment, Charizard's head was about to enter Gyarados' mouth. Yu reacted quickly, glancing around to see if there was anything he could do to prevent the situation. Surprisingly, he actually found something that could stop the situation. Without hesitation, Yu lifted the cushion from under his seat. He used all his strength to hit Charizard's tail. Feeling the pain in his tail, Gyarados immediately retracted his head to look at his tail, performing a series of subconscious protective movements. Chapter 827 Eye Contact. Seeing the blunder in the ward finally come to an end, Yu breathed a sigh of relief. His mood, which had been somewhat pessimistic due to his preoccupations, now brightened considerably. As if seeing his trainer finally overcome his earlier dejection and gloom, Pikachu, nestled in his arms, let out a soft, adorable cry. Pikachu on the other side of his arms, Buzzbot was equally eager. Buzzbuzz, okay, I'm fine. Don't worry, everyone. I was just lost in thought. I was so lost in thought that I worried you all. Despite his words, the Pokémon could tell their trainer was still preoccupied. And in the ward, Moltres, arguably the oldest of the group, immediately understood what Yu was thinking and what he had been struggling with. After all, as a legendary beast, Moltres' intuition and senses forced her to be constantly vigilant of what was happening outside. Flame. After a moment's contemplation, Moltres chirped. This cry immediately drew the attention of the other Pokémon in the ward. Each Pokémon cast their gazes towards the man lying on the bed, awaiting Moltres. Their expressions were filled with vigilance, and some even displayed a malicious look. After all, their current fate was entirely due to the Pokémon before them. How could the surrounding Pokémon accept this? Especially Charizard, the one who had battled Moltres the longest. Originally, it had been silently hiding in the corner, drawing circles and cursing because of the previous blunder. Now, a murderous aura filled its body, its eyes filled with a malicious glare that threatened to burst forth. It glared fiercely at Moltres, and if it weren't for its current physical condition and the situation, it would have rushed forward immediately. Next to it, Gyarados, still reeling from nearly swallowing Charizard's head and then kissing it, was silently retching beside a trash can. Hearing Moltres' cry, it felt like a call to battle. Its already weakened body tensed up instantly. Even though it irritated its wounds, it remained silent. Just moments earlier, Gyarados had been grimacing in pain in front of its companions, looking pitiful and ready to say, "You're out of your depth," but now, it displayed a completely different side, brimming with passion and ferocity. As for Suicune and Pikachu, two of the strongest Pokémon, with a slant on the verge of becoming the top contenders, they too were wary of Moltres, but nowhere near as exaggerated or aggressive as Gyarados and Charizard. Suicune's personality was simply that, he didn't particularly enjoy engaging in synergy with other Pokémon. Even though that Pokémon was a legendary fire type and it was a water type, and Moltres repelled it, Suicune's face remained expressionless, calm and composed. However, the ribbons wrapped around it fluttered in the wind. His gaze was fixed on Moltres. Although Suicune disliked fighting Moltres, after all, the reason they were in this ward was because of Moltres. He didn't want Moltres to go berserk again and destroy everything around them. After all, this wasn't like fighting in the open air of the crater. This ward had limited space, and if Moltres went berserk again and burned down the Pokémon Center, that would be disastrous. As for Pikachu, the nominal leader of Yuyu's Pokémon, at this moment, he no longer had the same lazy demeanor as before, lying in Yuyu's arms. It was as if a different Pikachu had been created. While its hostility toward Moltres wasn't as strong as Gyarados and Charizard's, it had already risen from Yuyu's arms, casually walking on its four short legs within the limited space of Yuyu's embrace. This stance was reminiscent of the way a flame lion would approach its prey in the prairie before hunting. This posture allowed the Pokémon to maintain a fighting stance. Facing the various gazes of abuse, hostility, and mild curiosity hurled at it from its bed, Moltres seemed oblivious to them, even stretching lazily and letting out a cry of comfort and contentment. Yuyu, in response to Moltres' cries, never rose from his seat, merely using his hands to incline his seated body toward Moltres. Though his actions remained silent, His words still expressed his concern. At the same time, a happy smile appeared on his face. "Molten, I didn't expect you to wake up, too. How is it going? Are you feeling any worse?" Molten faced with Yu's slightly concerned inquiry. Moltres finally didn't ignore Yu's concern as if it were ignoring the Pokémon. Lying on the hospital bed, Moltres seemed to understand, perhaps not understanding what he was saying, and simply shook its head. But then, it once again looked at Yu intently. Under Moltres' intense gaze, Yu was immediately puzzled, and their eyes met. Suddenly, man and pet stared at each other. Although there was no romantic encounter between them, through their eyes, they seemed to understand each other's feelings, what was being expressed. The two seemed to be immersed in a state of silent communication, oblivious to everything around them. In that moment, Yu seemed to have forgotten the fatigue of a busy day. Moltres, in turn, seemed to have forgotten the pain in his body and the Pokémon around him. Yu and Moltres stared at each other for a long time. Just when the Pokémon around them, led by Charizard and Gyarados, were getting impatient, Yu and Moltres finally started to move. Chapter 828 Unwilling. Flame. In the quiet of the hospital ward, Yu and Moltres stared at each other. Just as the other Pokémon watched with growing nervous anxiety, Moltres finally spoke first. Hearing Moltres' cry, Yu subconsciously nodded his head. A strange look crossed his eyes as he met Moltres'. "Maldito, you." At this point, Yu understood Moltres' message, but it remained a bit complex. A hint of uncertainty laced his words. Flame. Despite Yu's uncertain tone, Moltres, contrary to his usual behavior, nodded firmly. A closer look at Moltres' eyes revealed encouragement and affirmation. "Is that so, Moltres?" "Thank you." Yu knew Moltres was sensing his emotions and offering comfort. Flame. Moltres yelled at Yu. Seeing the opposing trainer understand her message, she smiled with satisfaction and nodded, not even glancing at the Pokémon glaring at her. She closed her eyes once more, ignoring the distractions. Faced with Moltres' display, Gyarados, ouch, the two most aggressive Pokémon, Gyarados and Charizard, erupted in anger, each releasing a powerful roar. Clearly, even though they were injured and not at their peak, their fierceness remained undimmed. Faced with Moltres' display, which she considered a provocation, Gyarados and Charizard, the two hotheads, erupted in fury. Their faces gleamed with malice, their eyes fiercely glaring at Moltres, as if they were about to charge and battle it for 300 rounds. However, someone eventually intervened in the face of their actions. Yu instantly stood up, cradling the dazed Pikachu in his arms. Without even turning his head, he shouted forward. "Stop it, Gyarados and Charizard, what's wrong with you two? Do you have to tear this ward apart? And can you be a little nicer to Moltres?" Yu shouted, then turned back with a hint of anger to glare at his two most powerful Pokémon. "Oh, I see. You two might be holding a grudge against Moltres because of your previous loss to it. Now facing its wounded state, you're thinking of a 2-on-1 fight. Give it a good beating." Yu, unsure whether it was true or not, voiced his suspicions, his eyes narrowing slightly. "If that's really the case, then I'm so disappointed in you two. I didn't expect you guys to be so insolent." Gyarados. "Oh my." Faced with their trainer's speculation, Gyarados and Charizard suddenly grew anxious. They didn't want their trainer to misunderstand them. They weren't exactly Pokémon that couldn't stand losing. They were simply irritated by Moltres' previous attitude. They were both furious and wanted to teach the other Pokémon a lesson in respect. They hadn't expected this to happen. Faced with their trainer's sudden outburst, not only Gyarados and Charizard, but the surrounding Pokémon were also somewhat stunned. Snorlax was already frightened, his eyes misting with fear, and he looked timid. He hid behind Suicune, peeking out and cautiously assessing his trainer, fearing he would freak out again. "Gyarados, Charizard, Pikachu. Even if you didn't say anything, I know you're in such a miserable state because of your defeat, even being outmatched. You're all deeply resentful and frustrated. I completely understand how you're feeling right now. You must be feeling incredibly resentful." Yu glanced around at the group of Pokémon surrounding him. He read out their names one by one, his tone softening from his initial irritation, as if he hadn't been the one to lose his temper. Speaking from an outsider's perspective. After hearing their trainer's words, the Pokémon present all lowered their heads in shame. Their dejected expressions were undeniable. Even Pikachu and Suicune, two Pokémon with immense prestige among the rest, were moved by this. For a moment, the rest of the Pokémon, led by these two, felt that their weakness was a burden to their trainer. If they were stronger, if their master possessed even stronger Pokémon, they wouldn't be in such a precarious position. At the same time, they felt a bit ashamed. After all, they were all surrounded by their friends, battling Moltres, even though some problems had arisen along the way. But these problems also had two sides. While they encountered some obstacles and difficulties, Moltres was also hampered. Otherwise, not only would they be sharing a ward with Moltres, they wouldn't even have the chance to see her Byakugan again. This proved the other side's strength and the right to be arrogant. After all, the law of the jungle prevails, and only the fittest survive. This is an eternal truth, and it applies even more to the Pokémon world. The law of the jungle is vividly demonstrated. Weak Pokémon ultimately have no right to survive, and are only bullied by the stronger ones. Even some weak Pokémon, if they don't forcibly increase their strength and force themselves to evolve, will ultimately remain at the bottom of the food chain, being crushed and stomped by the truly higher-level Pokémon. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 829 Self-Doubt. If some weak Pokémon don't force themselves to improve their strength and evolve to a higher level, they will ultimately remain at the bottom of the food chain, being crushed and bullied by the truly higher-level Pokémon. They have no right to resist unless they become stronger. Or perhaps they have a powerful leader within their pack who protects them and keeps them safe. Or perhaps they find a powerful enough trainer to guide them to strength. However, these methods are all very unstable, which is why Pokémon choose their trainers. Fortunately, over time, the laws of the forest have become less strict, and Pokémon and their worlds coexist peacefully. While the laws of the forest haven't been forgotten, they've been subtly ingrained in every Pokémon. After finally getting out all the words he'd been holding back, Yu felt a surge of relief. But looking at the shamefaced expressions of the Pokémon around him, Yu felt a surge of discomfort. As the Pokémon stood stunned, Yu bowed deeply to the surrounding Pokémon. "I'm sorry, everyone. My words were too harsh. As the trainer, I bear a great deal of responsibility for all this. It's all my fault for poor command. I didn't even properly judge whether any of you are still capable of fighting. I simply let my own impulsiveness lead you all to charge recklessly, leading to your injuries." Hearing these words, a stark contrast to what they had just said, the surrounding Pokémon stared up at their trainer with wide eyes in disbelief. He was particularly impressed by his sincerity, especially the deep, 90-degree bow he gave to the Pokémon he was waiting for. The Pokémon were stunned, speechless. Feeling the silence around them, Yu, still bowing deeply, didn't raise his head, so he didn't see the expressions on the Pokémon's faces, and instead assumed they hadn't forgiven him. After all, as he had just said, the reason Pokémon failed in battle wasn't solely due to their own faults, but more so due to their trainer's inadequate command. Pokémon are inherently simple-minded. Once they've identified their trainer, they'll unconditionally obey their trainer's orders. Of course, this doesn't apply to a few Pokémon with distinct personalities, or those whose trainers lack the ability to control them. At this moment, the ward fell silent once again. Even Moltres, who had reclined back in her bed, closed her eyes and silently listened to the events outside, couldn't wait to open her eyes and see what was happening. Pikachu Arceus, upon realizing what was happening, the Pokémon all let out their cries, creating a chaotic cacophony of sounds. Hearing these cries, Yu, who had been feeling a bit nervous, felt a sense of relief. But the next moment, the unexpected unfolded once again. At that moment, Yu burst into laughter, his voice strangely tinged with a hint of melancholy, a lack of confidence, and other negative emotions. After bursting into laughter, Yu felt a surge of joy. His mood, which had been somewhat depressed by the injuries to his Pokémon, lifted considerably. "Pikachu, everyone. I know I'm not an excellent or powerful Pokémon trainer. Otherwise, you wouldn't be lying here recuperating. Sometimes, I even wonder if I can properly train you, command you in battle, and lead you to victory after victory. Maybe even challenge the league tournament, win the championship trophy, become a true Pokémon Master, and lead you to the world stage. All of this leaves me feeling completely lost, because sometimes, I truly doubt the path ahead." Yu spoke with such sincerity, his eyes welling up. The fact that his Pokémon were collectively injured and hospitalized had completely shaken this normally self-assured Pokémon trainer. Indeed, his previously suppressed mood had relaxed considerably. However, Yu still felt a pang of resentment over the fact that he had allowed his Pokémon to be injured and hospitalized. After all, the situation was incredibly dire. If he hadn't gotten these Pokémon to the Pokémon Center in a timely manner, something catastrophic would have occurred. After all, this was no joke. Pokémon were living beings with flesh and blood. Anyone who witnessed this, or even someone who knew Yu's thoughts, would undoubtedly be puzzled. Was Yu's mental endurance so weak? Just facing a single defeat had shaken him so much, causing so many chaotic thoughts to arise. In reality, that wasn't the case. Yu had fought in at least 999, if not thousands, of Pokémon battles before this. And in those 999 battles, neither Yu nor his Pokémon had ever won every single one. There were even a few battles where Yu was completely defeated, sending out all 6 of his Pokémon only to fail to replace a single one of the other team's Pokémon. Of course, there were also some brutal battles, like the one now, where all of his Pokémon were hospitalized or injured. It was just at this time, the situation was more severe, and it was precisely because of these experiences that Yu felt a sense of fear. It wasn't that Yu couldn't stand losing or had a weak tolerance for it. It was truly due to his love for his Pokémon, and he was afraid that they would be injured again due to his own foolish decisions, putting their lives in danger. This was why, at this moment, after his complete outburst, Yu questioned his ability to continue leading his Pokémon into battle. Chapter 830 Challenge. Pikachu Gyarados. Just as Yu was still in disbelief, a group of Pokémon, led by Pikachu, pounced on him. Each of them, in their own unique way, helped their trainer regain his confidence. And truly, sensing the affection expressed by the Pokémon, Yu's initially uncertain heart and flickering eyes gradually grew firmer. Yes, we can't always win. No matter what, we're bound to encounter failure. But the goal isn't to let failure completely wear us down, but to defeat it. Since we've lost a battle, let's explore new strategies, improve our own strength, and defeat them. As if realizing something, Yu burst into laughter once more. The Pokémon, though unsure of the reason for their trainer's sudden laughter, were also inspired by their trainer's words and laughed heartily. Yes, everyone, thank you. You've given me such confidence and resolute purpose. Let's work together to become the world's greatest Pokémon Master. Yu's passion seemed to return, and he was the first to extend his hand. Though no words were spoken at this moment, the Pokémon all exchanged glances in unison, then followed suit, extending their hands or claws. Gyarados was particularly vulnerable. Due to its size, it couldn't squeeze into the circle, and it lacked hands, only a thick tail. Just as it joined the rest of the Pokémon, eagerly trying to insert its tail, it was met with unanimous resistance from the other Pokémon, forcing Gyarados to use its whiskers as a hand to join its companions in their hands. Yu had long been accustomed to this, but at this moment, as his palms touched those of his Pokémon, he felt an inexplicable sense of security. It was as if, with these Pokémon by his side, he was no longer alone. He was fearless. Yes, with you by my side. We'll progress together, advance and retreat together. What difficulties can't be overcome? It's just one failure, one annihilation, isn't it? As long as our crystal doesn't explode and our home isn't stolen, we still have a chance to turn things around. Even if our crystal explodes and our home is stolen, we can still start over. With everyone's companionship and support, I believe nothing is impossible. At this moment, Yu's smile was particularly joyful, for he had finally figured everything out, and resolved the long-held dilemma within him. Hands of varying shapes clasped together tightly. The morning sun, just beginning to rise, streamed in through the windows, illuminating the Pokémon and Yu, bringing a glimmer of hope for the future. Everyone, let's work hard together. Our goal is to become a Pokémon Master. Of course, our immediate goal is to defeat Moltres. Then, we'll challenge the 100-era gym to collect the 8 gym badges and qualify for the Kalos Regional League Tournament. Yu quickly mapped out his upcoming itinerary. Upon hearing his trainer's words, the Pokémon's eyes lit up with excitement. The stronger Pokémon, led by Pikachu, stared intently at Moltres, who had been lying on the hospital bed, having finally opened his eyes and looked back at them. Their eyes blazed brightly. Seeing the Pokémon in his charge so eager to fight, Yu's interest and desire were piqued. He nodded in satisfaction and then turned his gaze towards Moltres. Then, Moltres, please accept our challenge. This time, we won't hold back. Flame Moltres nodded without a second thought, though a closer look revealed a hint of anticipation. It turned out that the exchange between Yu and Moltres was actually a reflection of Moltres' resentment at being captured by Yu. While Yu's original intention was to capture Moltres for easy transport, take it to Pokémon Center for treatment, and then release it back into the wild, Moltres was, after all, a legendary beast, and its pride wouldn't allow it to endure the humiliating experience of being released. Therefore, driven by its pride and resentment at Yu's unauthorized capture, the message Moltres had previously conveyed to Yu was the reason. As someone who had spent a long time with Pokémon, Yu could more or less understand the message Moltres was conveying. In fact, this was in line with Yu's thoughts. After all, when a Pokémon trainer released a Pokémon, that Pokémon would be deeply hurt. After all, they had all been set free by their trainers, and this was a fact they could not deny. No matter what the reason was, the fact was still the fact. Chapter 831 Caught in the Act. This actually suited Yu's heart. After all, when a Pokémon trainer releases a Pokémon, that Pokémon will always be deeply hurt. After all, they were all once set free by their trainers, a fact they couldn't deny. Regardless of the reason, the fact remained the same. And for a trainer like Yu, who truly loved Pokémon, he not only loved Moltres because it was a legendary beast, but he also wouldn't easily do anything to harm a Pokémon. If possible, he certainly wouldn't let Moltres go. Why let a bird fly after it's already in his grasp? Therefore, with this tacit understanding between man and pet, they reached an agreement to wait until both Pokémon's condition had returned to peak before challenging each other again. As for whether it would be a one-on-one or a group battle like before, that depended on the circumstances. After all, since they had already reached this decision, they certainly wouldn't choose to win unfairly. This was a tacit agreement between a Pokémon trainer who loved Pokémon and a powerful and proud legendary beast. They exchanged glances and smiled. At that moment, whether it was Yu, the Pokémon trainer, or Pikachu, who would later experience it firsthand, or Moltres, who was about to accept or initiate a challenge, uncertain about her future, they all secretly hoped their injuries would heal quickly, allowing them to return to their peak strength for a decisive battle. Just as the atmosphere in the arena reached a fever pitch, with the Pokémon brimming with excitement and passion, seemingly forgetting their own injuries, the sound of a door opening shattered this beautiful atmosphere, shattering the hopeful scene of Yu and his Pokémon bathed in the sunlight, forming a holy light. The initially heated atmosphere in the arena suddenly cooled, even to the point of being awkward. Yu, how can you be a trainer? Your Pokémon aren't even healed yet, how could you let them all get up? And Pikachu, why are you so reckless? It's one thing for a trainer to be ignorant, but you're so careless about yourselves. Now, all of you, get back to your beds and rest. The door to the ward opened, revealing Miss Joy, yawning and drowsy as she entered. But upon seeing the scene before her, she paused for a moment before angrily, hands on her hips, shouting. She looked nothing like the sleepy, groggy look she had just had. Hearing this outburst, the Pokémon in the room, along with Yu, were all stunned, even the legendary Suicune and Moltres. They turned their heads stiffly, looking in the direction of the ward door. Miss Joy, though still accompanied by Chansey, looked nothing like her usual nurse uniform. She was wearing a pair of adorable pink pajamas, and the Chansey egg beside her was also not wearing its professional nurse's cap. Although wearing ordinary pajamas, Miss Joy's adorable and elegant demeanor couldn't be concealed. On any other day, Yu would have been tempted to glance at such a beautiful young lady, but this time, he didn't dare. He quickly averted his gaze, as if he'd been caught doing something bad by his teacher. As the sun gradually rose, Miss Joy, already accustomed to her biological clock, didn't immediately change into her nurse's uniform and open the Pokémon Center for business. Instead, as usual, she would first check on the Pokémon admitted to the intensive care unit to see how they were doing. Today was no exception, but this time, when she opened the door, she was met with a scene that infuriated her. Clearly, the Pokémon needed rest due to their serious injuries, but the renowned trainer, Yu, instead of letting them rest, had roused them all. Wasn't this clearly harming the Pokémon? Miss Joy, still unaware of the situation, subconsciously immersed herself in her own thoughts. Convinced that everything was going as she imagined, she immediately gave Yu a cold shoulder and dragged him out of the ward. She then had Jigglypuff escort him to the care of Serena and the other two. In reality, Miss Joy had her own agenda. As a Pokemon nurse, she had some knowledge of human illnesses. Seeing Yu still appearing frail, especially since he had arrived in the ward earlier than she did, she could infer that the Pokemon trainer had probably been so worried about his Pokemon that he'd stayed up all night. This wasn't acceptable. Not to mention that he was her sister's adopted brother, he was also her own adopted brother. Simply out of a nurse's responsibility to her patients, Miss Joy had no choice but to resort to this last resort. After all, she didn't want Yu to sneak back in to see his Pokemon before they'd rested long enough, thus hampering their recovery. Seeing that Yu had been brought back by Chansey, the three clever women seemed to have guessed something. Although they were initially yawning, looking completely sleepy, they saw Yu, completely slumbering under the effects of Chansey's singing attack. Serena and the other two quickly rose and washed up, then went to help Miss Joy with a Pokemon in Yu's care. They also left one of their sisters to help look after Yu. This was incredibly attentive service, even worthy of an emperor. After all, having three beautiful women like them help out was something anyone would be happy to receive. Dividing line, setting that aside for now, Yu had been caught by Miss Joy secretly watching over the Pokemon overnight and sent back to his room to rest. Chapter 832 Panic Xiaozhi. Let's put that aside for now. Yu, caught secretly accompanying the Pokemon overnight by Miss Joy, was sent back to his room to rest, now under the close supervision of Serena and the other two girls. His gaze returned to Pallet Town. In the early morning hours of Pallet Town, the hard-working farmers had already risen, beginning their day's hard work. From time to time, a dodo or dotterly would perch in a house or elsewhere, their distinctive call echoing. This call often signaled the beginning of a day's hard work. It wasn't just this sincerity in the spirit that made the village truly a paradise. Not only were the people up early, but the Pokemon did the same, either frolicking in the fields or occasionally soaring through the air. Everything seemed carefree and free. But within this beautiful atmosphere, a shrill cry shattered the atmosphere. Oh no, oh no, oh no. I'm going to be late, I'm going to be late. My Pokemon, my starter Pokemon? The cry completely shattered the tranquil atmosphere of the village. Eyes followed the sound. That was Hanako's door. Following the gazes of the crowd, their gaze shifted once again to the source of the sound. Hanako, the epitome of a loving wife and mother, had risen early, prepared breakfast, and waited for her son to wake up. Perhaps it was because she knew her son would be embarking on a journey that day that Hanako had been thinking about it all night, unable to sleep. She had risen even earlier than usual, prepared breakfast, and repeatedly checked her son's luggage to see if anything was missing. It's safe to say that Hanako hadn't slept a wink the entire night, simply because she was thinking about her son embarking on his own journey the next day. Not only had she prepared everything for her son's journey, she had even sewn him a piece of clothing. After fully confirming her preparations were flawless, Hanako finally relaxed a bit. She settled into the sofa, wanting to close her eyes and rest for a while, waiting for her son to come down for breakfast. Perhaps it was the thought of her son's upcoming trip that prompted Hanako, as a mother, to not wake her sleepy son up early for exercise as usual. Instead, she let Satoshi sleep as much as he pleased. This is perhaps a common problem for every mother. For example, if your son hasn't been home from studying for a long time, she'll treat him to a delicious meal and nothing else. But if things get too long, a mother will inevitably become resentful and demand that he do things. But before Hanako could even close her eyes and rest, her son's slightly panicked cry echoed from the second floor, startling her. But Hanako, true to her mother, knew her son intimately. After a brief moment of daze, Hanako calmed down and sat back down in her chair. Sure enough, a few moments later, a noise echoed from the rooftop, accompanied by a flurry of footsteps. The cries of Pokemon echoed, and most notably, Ash's slightly panicked voice. Hurry, hurry, I'm going to be late. I'm going to be late. Today is the first day of my journey. How can I be late? I haven't even received my starting Pokemon yet. Ash, you're really unusual today. You're up so early. Usually, you only get up when I call you, but today, you're up half an hour early. Hanako walked over, looking at her son with a hint of amusement. Although she had more or less guessed what was going on, she couldn't help but tease him. And what's going on that has you so flustered? You don't have to go on a trip so early. After dinner, you can leave whenever you want, Satoshi got up from the ground and rubbed his aching butt. Then, with a mixture of excitement and anxiety, he looked at his mother. "Mom, how can I not be anxious? You know, today is the day I'm leaving for my trip. It's also the day I get my starting Pokemon and become a rookie trainer." After hearing her son's somewhat irrational words, Hanako couldn't wait for the car to arrive. Suddenly, she felt a sense of mourning for the Pokemon her son would eventually acquire. But seeing her son's anxious expression, as if he was about to rush out without even eating breakfast, Hanako adopted a motherly attitude, hands on hips, and glared at her son with a hint of irritation. "Ash, you didn't oversleep, did you? Didn't you get your starter Pokemon, Pikachu, yesterday? How could you forget about it just one night? How sad will Pikachu be?" As if to confirm Hanako's words, Pikachu let out a cry as she finished speaking. It was his first time enjoying the warmth of the human world, and Pikachu hadn't adjusted yet. Even when his trainer suddenly got up and ran out, Pikachu was still dazed. When Ash was almost at the stairs, Pikachu shook his head and hurried after him. As soon as he reached the stairs, he overheard the conversation between Hanako and Ash. Chapter 833 The Impending Separation. Just as they reached the stairs, they overheard the conversation between Hanako and Satoshi, the mother-son duo. Pikachu suddenly let out a disgruntled cry. Pika Pika. Not only that, but it seemed to feel that this didn't adequately capture the intensity of his feelings. At this moment, arcs of electricity flashed from the electric sacs on Pikachu's cheeks. Then, as Satoshi watched in horror, a 100,000-volt bolt of electricity struck him mercilessly. "Ah, ah, 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 ah. It's numb." Satoshi's screams rang out again. After the shock, his entire body darkened, his hair a complete afro. He barely opened his mouth to speak when plumes of black smoke billowed from his body. Seeing this, Hanako felt no pang of heartache. Instead, she seemed to gloat over her son's plight. She couldn't help but open her arms, inviting Pikachu to leap into her arms. Pikachu was quite clever and quick-witted. Upon seeing this, he immediately threw himself into Hanako's arms without hesitation, rubbing his head against her chest from time to time, his expression of coquettishness evident. "Good boy, Pikachu. You did well. It's my fault, a trainer, that I was so irresponsible that I actually forgot about you. If this happens again, you will be merciless." Pikachu instantly lit up at Hanako's words. As if he had received a special imperial sword, his eyes gleamed with cunning as he looked at Satoshi. Satoshi, on the other hand, cried out in pain at his mother's words. "Are you kidding me? Mom won't do that. I'm your biological son. You can't treat him like that. I'm not your biological son anymore. You didn't give me away as a gift for phone bills. Or maybe you picked me up from a street trash can." After Pikachu's 100,000-volt baptism, Ash finally seemed to come to his senses, remembering what happened yesterday. Yes, he had obtained his first Pokemon last night, becoming a true novice trainer. If that was the case, why was he in such a hurry to get going? Hence, Ash's pitiful expression after scrambling to his feet. Alright, Ash, stop playing the victim. Besides, even if it's time to get your first Pokemon, even if you're probably late, just go get me breakfast. And remember to wash and brush your teeth." Hanako glared at her son, but then smiled and pointed to the nearby bathroom. "Okay, I've been starving for a while now." Satoshi, unfazed by the awkwardness of being caught, ran straight towards the bathroom. Hanako, momentarily mesmerized by her son's departure, was lost in thought. It's so alike. Satoshi is so much like his father, even the way he left at year is exactly the same. Hanako seemed to have a thought. Watching Satoshi enter the bathroom, she was completely lost in memories. Pika the Pikachu in her arms let out a puzzled cry. She had no idea what her trainer's mother was talking about. It seemed as if Pikachu's cry had awakened Hanako from her memories. She immediately looked at Pikachu, who was looking up at her with a puzzled expression. She couldn't help but chuckle and gently pinched its nose. "What's the matter, Pikachu? I'm worried about you, Pikachu. You're such a reliable kid. I'll be counting on you for the rest of the trip, Ash. I hope you can help me take good care of him." A mother worries about her child even when he's 1,000 miles away. This saying rings true for any mother. Even after a night of this, Hanako had already come to her senses. Still, she couldn't help but feel a little worried. After all, her son knew what she was doing. Furthermore, her son was a carefree type, and this was his first time traveling alone. It would be a lie to say she wasn't worried, But she couldn't just hold him in her arms forever. Eventually, she had to let him fly, let him spread his wings. Pika, faced with Hanako's exhortation, almost a request, Pikachu paused for a moment, then smiled and nodded. "Mom, what are you cooking for this morning?" "I'm starving." Ash was truly carefree and carefree. Even facing the impending departure for their journey, he seemed unmoved by any sadness. He shouted to his mother as he did every morning, "I made some of your favorite dishes. If you like them, hurry up and have some." Hanako, carrying Pikachu, followed closely behind him, already in the kitchen dining area. Then, Satoshi continued to talk about his future journey, longing for life. Hanako sat quietly by her son's side, listening without interruption, a serene smile on her face. Pikachu sat on the other side, devouring the Pokemon food Hanako had specially prepared for him with relish, occasionally joking with a few words. Time slipped by slowly, and breakfast was quickly over. And for a foodie like Satoshi, breakfast was a matter of minutes. Before long, most of the food had been consumed, much of it going into Satoshi's stomach, while Hanako only ate a few quick bites to fill her stomach. After seeing this scene, Hanako knew her son would soon be leaving on his journey. Although she felt a pang of reluctance, she quickly adjusted her mindset as the moment approached, forcing herself to hold back the tears of sadness. She simply watched silently as her son, overfed and slouched over the back of his chair, rubbing his stomach and repeatedly complaining about his fullness. Chapter 834, Leaving and Starting. "Okay, Mom, don't see me off. Everyone, go home, I'm about to embark on my journey." At the entrance of Pallet Town, after finishing the breakfast his mother had lovingly prepared for him and resting for a while at home, Ash, unable to contain his excitement, finally set out on his journey. And at that moment, it wasn't just Hanako, the mother, who came to see him off. Many neighbors, as well as some Pallet Town folks close to Hanako and her family, came to see him off. After all, in this day and age, sending one's child off to become a Pokemon trainer was a significant event. Furthermore, if a trainer from Pallet Town achieved success, the benefits wouldn't just be shared by that trainer, their fellow villagers would also benefit. After all, strength would eventually earn them respect, and the league would likely offer their town many benefits. Pallet Town had already gained a certain level of fame thanks to the emergence of Professor Oak. But good things don't come easy, which is why Professor Oak is so dedicated to training new trainers. After all, despite his fame, he's not immune to the dangers of corruption. Only when the trainers he trains become truly powerful will he benefit even more. Therefore, regardless of who or where a family has a child about to embark on the path of becoming a Pokemon trainer, they'll be greeted with a line of people, just like the scene in Pallet Town. "By the way, Professor Oak. Where's that Momo? Why don't I see him?" As if finally remembering his nemesis, Ash couldn't help but glance at Professor Oak, dressed in a white lab coat, in the crowd. Upon learning of Ash's impending departure, Professor Oak had dropped his work and rushed to see him off. It's worth noting that he'd already recorded all the information about the two legendary beasts, Entei and Reikau, otherwise, he wouldn't have put aside his important tasks to come and see him off. After all, for him, completely absorbed in Pokemon research, nothing was more important than studying Pokemon. Needless to say, Chen Kalen and Lizuner had already claimed their starter Pokemon and embarked on a journey to the regions recommended by Professor Oak. With their travel expenses already covered, they had already clearly defined their goal, to participate in the Pokemon Regional League tournament. Their goal was clear, to defeat the 8 regional gyms in their respective regions, earn 8 gym badges, and qualify for the league challenge. Furthermore, the two women had been eagerly anticipating this and were deeply envious of Yu's ability to travel. Therefore, filled with anticipation and excitement, the two women stayed up all night, arriving at Professor Oak's office early in the morning. Even before the villagers had even gotten up, they had already arrived at Professor Oak's research lab to refresh themselves. With no one to see them off or offer their blessings, they waited until Professor Oak had thoroughly recorded the information about the two mythical beasts, Thunder God and Entei, before departing. It was precisely for this reason that Professor Oak, the fervent Pokemon researcher, had a chance to rest for a while. Perhaps it was because he had recorded most of the information about the two legendary beasts, or perhaps it was because he had been studying Pokemon all night, that his excitement was still there. Even when Professor Oak joined the crowd to see Ash off, he still looked energetic, not even a hint of sleepiness. After all, If it weren't for the fact that Ash was a highly promising trainer he had high hopes for, Professor Oak would probably have returned to his work after a short break. At this moment, after hearing Ash's question, Professor Oak blinked and touched his chin, as if thinking. Later, he slapped his forehead, as if suddenly remembering something. Oh, you mean Xiaomao? That guy's already left. He's on a trip in a sports car with his group of girlfriends. Looking at the sky, it's probably been 2 hours since we left. And considering the speed, they should have reached Viridian City by now. What? Xiaozhi screamed upon hearing Professor Oak's words. He was insecure, thinking Xiaomao would only be slightly faster than him. But he hadn't expected that he'd just set off when his rival had already reached the first city of their journey. This made Xiaozhi feel a little upset. He was still in the novice village, farming monsters. But you had already unknowingly unlocked the next map and started farming elite monsters. They'd agreed to grow together, become stronger together, and then face off in the league tournament. What about this? This was clearly a liar, a big liar, taking advantage of someone's feelings. At this thought, Ash felt a surge of anxiety. He didn't want to be left far behind by his rival before he even started. So, in a panic, Ash made a move to run forward, to get out of here and get going. However, before he'd taken a few steps, Professor Oak called out to him. By the way, Ash. Before Mao left, I told you to catch up with him as soon as possible. Don't get too far behind. Otherwise, you won't even be able to defeat your rival. Don't worry, Professor Oak. I will definitely defeat Mao and take the trophy for winning the league this time. Ash seemed incredibly confident at this point. He simply said this to Professor Oak before taking off, leading Pichu and running. Facing the setting sun, only the silhouettes of the man and his pet could be seen running off into the distance. Pallet Town is where trainers begin. I'll look forward to your performance tomorrow. Professor Oak and the other villagers watched the two figures run away until they were completely out of sight. Professor Oak then put his hands behind his back, looked ahead, and said quietly, Hanako, how are you? Are you reluctant to let go? Nothing to be reluctant about. If he wants to grow, he must eventually let Satoshi go out on his own and let him experience something. Chapter 835 Panic. Thus, on this special day, everyone you had met embarked on their own journeys, each pursuing their dreams. Unbeknownst to him, perhaps because he was the first to embark on this journey, he would be the target of all the traveling poets who followed. Whether it was Chen Kalen and Li Zuner, or Xiaomao and Xiaozhi, the person they most wanted to defeat was Yu. After all, everyone subconsciously believed that those who had set out earlier and had been traveling longer than them would inevitably be stronger than those who had set out later. After all, if one could set out earlier, opportunities would arise sooner, and there would be more chances to become stronger. However, Yu, far away in the Pokémon Center of Bake City in Kalos, was unaware of this. At that moment, he was soundly asleep, comforted and cared for by Serena and the other two girls. Meanwhile, Serena and the other girls took turns eating and helping to care for Pikachu and other injured Pokémon. Perhaps it was sheer sleepiness, or the pressure, or perhaps it was the reassurance that Pikachu and the others were safe, that completely relaxed her tense heart. The moment Yu, already exhausted, lay down on the bed, she immediately fell into a dream, snoring. This sleep cycle lasted the entire day. When Yu opened his eyes again and looked out at the sky, the neon cityscape had already returned to life outside the window. Yu sat up and immediately checked his current physical condition. He found himself 100 times more energetic than he had been that morning. The internal energy in his Danshin, which had been depleted, was once again replenished. Just then, as Yu was conducting a comprehensive self-examination, the room's door was opened. Serena and the others, after finishing dinner, noticed that Yu hadn't eaten all day. Wanting to check if he'd gotten up, they brought him dinner. As if by sheer luck, Yu's stomach, seemingly lurched by the aroma of food, began to growl. The two parties had been traveling together for quite some time, and their relationship was already special. So, without hesitation, he accepted the offered dinner without hesitation and devoured it with relish, as if he hadn't eaten in days and nights. After hastily finishing his meal, Yu's thoughts turned to his Pokémon. Suddenly, a sudden surge of anxiety and worry filled his heart. They were all injured, after all. While some were seriously injured, their condition had improved considerably after his care. But without him, he had no idea if they were eating and resting regularly. So, Yu hurriedly opened the door and rushed back to the ward where Pikachu and the others were staying. His deep concern and care for his Pokemon made him yearn to see them every moment, especially under these special circumstances. Pikachu, Pikachu, what's wrong? Yuyu's voice was heard before he even saw him. Even before he entered the ward, he could hear Yu yelling. As a result, after he pushed open the door and entered, Serena and the other two followed closely behind, with Miss Joy beside them. Yu, what's wrong with you? I've told you countless times. No public noises are allowed in the Pokemon Center. Seeing Miss Joy with her hands on her hips, looking furious, Yuyu's excitement was instantly dampened as if by a bucket of cold water. He didn't confront Miss Joy or offer a blunt, admitting defeat or apology. Miss Joy, seeing Yuyu seemingly acknowledging his mistake, simply gave him some advice before pushing the door open and leaving, mumbling softly. Yu, Serena, and the others were left alone in the ward, accompanying Pikachu and the other injured Pokemon. I have to say this, I don't know if it's a miracle, the Pokemon's inherently formidable physical qualities, or perhaps the Pokemon Center's medical equipment is simply too advanced. Yesterday, the Pokemon that were brought in, nearly dead, even in critical condition, have largely recovered after just a day and a night of recuperation. While they can't yet engage in strenuous exercise or battle, they can still perform basic physical movements. In a matter of moments, Pikachu and the younger Pokemon were already playing with the Pokemon of the girls, including Longtail Fiery Fox. Yu, you should be relieved now, Pikachu. They're fine, yeah, that's good. That's good, Yu murmured in relief as he watched the Pikachu, covered in bandages, happily playing with the Pokemon in the hands of the girls. Selina, Xiaoxu, Aor. Thank you so much for this time. If it weren't for you being there for me, I really don't know what I would have done. Yu then expressed his heartfelt gratitude to the three women. Perhaps it might appear that the three women had done nothing, that Yu had been operating all by himself. But their silent support was the best encouragement he could offer. It's okay, it's okay. As long as you don't mind, we're just being a hindrance, Yu, that's really too polite. After all, we've supported each other and been partners all this way. Air and Selina both spoke up, their eyes gazing at Yu with indescribable expressions. Yu and the two women locked gazes. Seeing the undisguised affection in their eyes, Yu felt a moment of panic, and he quickly shifted his gaze, looking around. He glanced at Xiaoxu, pleading for help, hoping for some help. However, when that pleading look met Xiaoxu's eyes, Yuyu's heart was in a mess. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 836 Doubt. He cast a pleading glance at Xiaoxu, hoping for some help. However, when that pleading gaze met Xiaoxu's, Yuyu's heart was in turmoil. This was, of course, the result of a silent agreement between Serena and the other two girls. After this incident, they had all grown up a bit, and had learned more about taking the initiative. If they had continued their ordinary, uneventful lives, they would have waited their entire lives, even until their death, for Yu to take the initiative. Instead of that, it would have been better for them to take the initiative first, to seize the opportunity and take the initiative. This led to Serena and Air boldly locking eyes with Yu, and Yu, unable to withstand the pressure, cast a pleading gaze at Xiaoxu, only to be frightened by her gaze once again. With a swish, cold sweat immediately streamed down Yuyu's forehead, and his once resolute gaze shifted in a frenzy. Fortunately, this situation didn't last long, or else Yu would have been forced to flee. Charizard, who had been playing with a Pokemon of long-tailed Firefox and the others, had at some point separated from their playful group and, alone, headed towards Yu, its trainer. Oh my, Charizard, perhaps sensing its master's awkwardness or simply being completely heartless, ignored the seemingly disgruntled glares from Serena and the other two, or the subtle, smug glee from its master. The moment it arrived, Charizard placed a claw on its master's shoulder. This move completely ended the awkward situation. Although Charizard was known for its strong nerves, it remained wary of the resentful gazes from the three women, who seemed to want to strangle and kick it out. What was this inexplicable murderous aura? I felt the light shining down on me, making me feel cold. The flames on my tail suddenly lost their warmth. Looking in the direction of the murderous aura, I saw only the 3 female assassins, their eyes gazing at me with a desire to devour me alive. Charizard couldn't help but shrink its head, as if realizing it had done something wrong. The words it wanted to say to its trainer seemed to get stuck in its throat. For a long time, it remained silent, its mouth wide open, staring at Serena and the other 2 with an innocent and pitiful expression, as if begging for mercy. Serena and the other 2, however, were naturally filled with grief and indignation. As for Charizard, its miserable gaze seemed to ignore it, even letting out a cold snort from time to time. It was as if it was saying, "Charizard, just wait for us. You dare to ruin our good thing? We've got a grudge. You know, after what just happened." Serena and the other 2 girls had put on a brave front before you, but in reality, that was a long-planned plot, a courage they had finally mustered. And then, Charizard shattered it in a flash. How could they possibly be in a better mood? Serena, the most bashful of the 3, blushed almost as red as a tomato as she recalled her bold move. Charizard's eyes, like those of a young woman, were filled with a faint mist. "You ruined my plan, I'm about to cry." Charizard's scalp tingled, and he almost wanted to smother himself with a piece of tofu. What the hell was going on? He should have never believed what Pichu and the others had said. Just now, he'd watched his master and Serena and the other 2 girls get caught up in a strange atmosphere. The Pokémon that had been playing and frolicking stopped playing and, led by Pikachu, the rest of Leafy's Pokémon, gathered together, beginning to plot something sinister. "Buzz, look at the master, what's he doing?" "Pikachu, you don't understand, little kid. Go play in the mud. You'll understand when you grow up." "Variegatus, that's right, little Buzz, you're still too young. You'll understand when you grow up." Ignoring the surprised and confused expressions of the long-tailed fox, the Pokémon gathered in a small circle, their heads of varying sizes huddled together. From time to time, they would steal a glance to see where their master was and where he was headed. "Buzzbat, what? I was only born a little later, how can I be considered a child? I once fought a legendary Moltres with you, my seniors. So can you please stop treating me like a child?" Buzzbat complained bitterly, glancing at the little Snorlax next to him. Seeing Buzzbat's gaze directed at him, the little Snorlax was bewildered and scratched his head. His big, round eyes were filled with confusion. Snorlax. Buzzbat covered his eyes after seeing this again. Well, it seems only the little Snorlax, who had grown up on his own, was considered a child. However, Pikachu and the others no longer paid attention to Buzzbat's complaints. Instead, they began their full-blown meeting among the adult Pokémon. However, there was one special presence among them, Charizard. Despite his thoughtful nods, as if understanding everything, Charizard was actually just as bewildered as Buzzbat. He even felt a small smugness when Buzzbat asked, believing it was better to have someone behind him to ask questions than a senior like him. He seemed to be okay with it, but when Buzzbat's question was deflected, Charizard felt deeply disappointed. He wanted to ask something in person, but couldn't pretend to know nothing in front of his backer. Would that be embarrassing? So, he could only nod nonchalantly, pretending to understand everything. Chapter 837, Discussion Among Pokémon. PEKA. Okay, now let's talk about what we're going to do. Variety, what else can we do? Of course, we're going to help our trainer. There's a saying among humans, it's better to tear down 10 temples than to ruin a marriage. Fire arrow, not bad, not bad. I think so too. Don't you think the master of the long-tailed fox and the others is a good match for our master, Buzz? A good match? How could I not think so? As if to highlight that he's grown up and understands a lot, or as if to make his presence felt, the little guy, Buzz, interrupted again. Giant Claw, Buzz, you silly boy. I see you usually have a pretty good time with the aroma sprite. At this point, the crab, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke, as if unable to bear it any longer. Buzzbat, that's right, I like playing with Sister Aromatherapy the most. She usually takes good care of me, and she always gives me most of the delicious food that her owner makes for her. After hearing what the giant crab said, Buzzbat seemed to have thought of something, and spoke excitedly, and even stretched out his little tongue to lick his mouth from time to time, and a drop of crystal clear liquid silently slid out from the corner of his mouth. Giant Claw, yes, that's it. If you still want your aromatherapy sister to keep playing with you, then you'd better hope that her master can get together with your aromatherapy sister's master. After getting the exact reply from Buzzbat, the corners of the giant crab's mouth couldn't help but curl up, and finally stopped spitting out the white foam, looking particularly excited. Buzzbat, okay, if that's the case. Then I agree that Master and Aroma's sister Master should be together. Upon hearing the conversation between the two creatures beside him, especially Buzzbat's eager cheering, Pikachu glared at them both with a stern look. Furthermore, he swiftly covered Buzzbat's mouth, which was still cheering. Pika, idiot, what are you doing? Do you want your Aroma sister to hear what we're plotting? Buzzbat, rebuked by Pikachu, was like a mouse encountering a cat, instantly pausing to speak. Like a grieved little baby, Buzzbat hid in a corner, drawing circles, but his ears perked up. After all, even though he had left the chat, his ears were still a valuable asset. A bat Pokemon's ears weren't just for show. Seeing that the little Pokemon, who was asking 100,000 questions, had left the group chat, Pikachu and the others breathed a sigh of relief and continued their own plotting. Pikachu, so, we should find a way to get our masters to live with them. That way, they'll have someone to take care of them, and if they're happy, we'll benefit too, right? Pikachu. After all, the food those three hostesses make is incredibly delicious. If they could just become our hostesses, we'd have no worries about food and drink every day. Well, Pikachu's next words completely exposed his inner thoughts. Seeing the speechless looks from his friends, Pikachu, the boss, showed no sign of fear. Instead, he glared, appearing particularly imposing. Pikachu, why, don't you think so? Don't tell me you haven't thought about it before. Hearing Pikachu's words, some of them lowered their heads involuntarily, embarrassed expressions on their faces. After all, what Pikachu said was true. The reason they didn't speak out was simply because they were embarrassed. But now that the leader was leading the charge, nothing was a problem. However, there was an exception. Just when Pikachu thought he had silenced his friends with his eloquence, Ditto suddenly spoke up. Although he completely agreed with Pikachu's words, he said it without a trace of embarrassment on his face. Ditto, Tisk, so I'm just like you. You think a little food can buy me off? You're so naive. Suicune, who had been listening quietly and silently, ignored Ditto's cries and finally spoke up. Sui, Pikachu, you said it well, and we all support Master and the Mistress's pairing up. But something seems off right now, doesn't it? Don't you think Master is getting quite nervous? Shouldn't we go and help him calm down? Suicune, undoubtedly the calmest of all the Pokemon, no matter where they are. This remark directly revealed the underlying situation. After Suicune's reminder, Pikachu and the others finally realized that something was amiss in the atmosphere. They had taken everything for granted before, but Master's situation seemed a bit complicated now. Could it be that there were too many mistresses, and Master was debating which one to choose? They thought Master's thinking was childish, saying only minors would consider choosing an adult. Why not just take them all? He grumbled helplessly inwardly, but for the sake of his own daily snacks and a life of ease, Pikachu ultimately decided to help his master. However, the specifics of how to help were another matter. So Pikachu spoke directly to his doubts, hoping to get his friends to speak up. He collected their ideas and found a suitable way to reject them. But it was surprising that after discussing it, he actually came up with a solution. But who should speak up was another matter. After all, being the first to speak out was not an easy task. If no one could do it well, and offended the trainers on both sides, it would be a disaster. So, even though they had a solution in mind, they still didn't know which Pokemon to send forward. The Pokemon kept trying to wait and see which Pokemon would take the initiative. Chapter 838, Bluff. Although they had a plan in mind, they still had no idea which Pokemon to send forward. The Pokemon kept waiting, hoping to see which one would volunteer. And surprisingly, after all that waiting, they finally saw someone volunteer. At this moment, Charizard scratched his head awkwardly, a bewildered look on his face. He had seen the two younger ones, Buzzbat and Snorlax, finally run to a corner and start drawing circles under the persuasion of their superiors. Only then did Charizard finally free himself from any burden and reveal his naive side to the remaining Pokemon. After all, strictly speaking, apart from the two newborns, all the Pokemon present in Yu's Pokemon team seemed older than him. Even Buzzbat, who was currently hiding away to cool off due to being disliked by the others, was, in a sense, of higher status than him. After all, ranking them by seniority and status in their team seemed a bit strange. Take Pikachu, for example. While not the strongest or oldest member of Yu's team, Pikachu had been with EU the longest, and therefore held a high prestige within the team. Yet, within this group, seniority and status were often ranked based on age, seniority, and strength. Therefore, Charizard didn't feel the slightest bit embarrassed in this situation. And so, just as the other Pokémon were debating who to nominate to facilitate this seemingly auspicious event, Charizard weakly extended its claws, a move that seemed abrupt amidst the silence of the other Pokémon. Its claws were so trembling that it seemed to be shaking slightly, indicating that raising a hand to speak to Charizard in this situation was indeed a certain amount of psychological pressure. Pikachu, wow, someone actually volunteered. Variety, you're right, old spear. You're the real deal. I apologize for my previous disrespect and contempt for you. Seeing Charizard step forward, the previously dull atmosphere in the arena suddenly became lively again. The Pokémon began to speak again. Although the conversation was noisy, without exception, they all praised Charizard. Oh my, no, I'm not as good as you all say. I just wanted to ask what you meant by what you just said. Charizard felt a little embarrassed by the sudden praise from his friends. He scratched his head with a blush. Although it felt a little difficult to speak out, Charizard couldn't help but ask the question that had been lingering in his mind. As Charizard expressed his doubts, the previously lively atmosphere in the arena instantly became united. For a moment, the previous silence returned. Pikachu Water Veloce, the Pokémon froze in shock, their lips twitching. But seeing Charizard still looking clueless, completely unaware of the situation, the arguing Pokémon suddenly exchanged a glance, their heads barely aligning, and a decision was made for Charizard. Very egotist, old pen, we were actually just discussing how we were going to fight that Flamabird once we're better. Pikachu, that's right, that's a formidable opponent after all. And we absolutely must defeat him this time, or we'll be humiliated. Very egotist, that's right, but even though we're eager to fight, we can't do anything without Master's consent. Firebolt, how about this, old pen, as the strongest of our Pokémon right now, why don't you ask Master on our behalf when we can start fighting Moltres? That's right. To help their Master out of this awkward situation and achieve their desired goal, Pikachu and the others are resorting to every possible means. They've even teamed up to resort to deception. After all, no matter what, they need to get their Master through this difficult time first. Oh my, but is this really okay? I'm going to interrupt the Master and the three mistresses. Will they beat me to death? Charizard was still a little confused, even confused about why their words were so different from what they had said before. Therefore, out of curiosity and vigilance, it still asked this question. Giant Claw, don't worry about this. Based on my years of experience, the Master will not only not blame you, but even praise you. At this time, the crab took on the attitude of a senior and shouted directly at Charizard. Oh my, seriously? Don't lie to me. If the Master hits me, I'll be in big trouble. Pika, don't worry. It's just as the crab said. Besides, I'm not asking you to go up there for any reason. I just wanted you to ask you when the battle with Moltres will begin. Oh my, although still a little skeptical, under the urging of his friends, he forced Charizard to step forward and ask. It was precisely because of this that the scene just happened. That was a close call. Luckily Charizard arrived just in time. Otherwise, I really don't know how we'd get along. It seems Charizard is getting closer and closer to me. I'll give him a treat when we get back. Yu secretly rejoiced and gave Charizard a thumbs up. However, compared to his current good mood, Serena and the other two girls were not at all happy. Serena and the other two girls hated Charizard so much that they scolded him, but they could only stare at Charizard. Chapter 839 Promise. Ouch! Under the fierce gazes of the three women, Charizard's back was covered in cold sweat. Beads of sweat streamed down his cheeks, and Charizard felt his body was so stiff that he couldn't even move. He was afraid that the next move would anger the three women. At the same time, his pitiful eyes looked at his friends for help, hoping that they could offer a solution. There was also a hint of blame in his eyes. After all, they had tricked him into doing this. However, in the face of Charizard's pleading gaze, the Pokémon seemed to have ignored it and turned their eyes away, no longer looking at it. Charizard was instantly filled with despair. Even if it was reacting foolishly, no matter how slow, it had already realized that it had been completely tricked. But it was too late to regret it now. After all, his friends had tricked him and refused to help him. One can imagine the despair he felt at that moment. Meanwhile, Just as the atmosphere seemed to be growing dull, Moltres, which had kept its eyes closed the entire time, secretly opened them a crack. It turned out that Pikachu and the others had been discussing this heatedly, and they hadn't excluded Moltres at all. This meant that Moltres was fully aware of the Pokémon's plans. But even though he'd listened the entire time, he hadn't even opened his eyes to observe them before. But at this moment, he couldn't contain his curiosity and opened his eyes a fraction. After all, he wanted to see Charizard's pitiful, sympathetic performance. If nothing else, he recognized Charizard's strength. After all, it was a capable opponent. And since they were both fire and flying type Pokémon, they would likely become formidable rivals. Indeed, at this moment, even Yu hadn't yet engaged in a Pokémon battle with Moltres. The outcome of their bet hadn't been decided yet. But inwardly, Moltres still subconsciously considered itself Yu's Pokémon. Precisely because she had silently considered Charizard a formidable rival, Moltres was eager to see Charizard suffer a humiliating blow. After all, it could serve as a future threat to Charizard. Since they were rivals, arguments were inevitable. Therefore, for Moltres, finding any dirt or evidence against Charizard early on would be a significant advantage. However, as a compassionate trainer, and having just received Charizard's help, how could Yu not step in to help his Pokémon? And so, just when Charizard felt uneasy, Yu intervened at the perfect moment. Alright, Charizard, stop standing there and get back to your bed and rest. You're going to be a key player in the battle, so don't hold me back. Yu's words proved incredibly effective. Just that single sentence seemed to completely dispel Charizard's initial discomfort, and it regained its spirits. The three women's persistent gazes were automatically ignored. Unconcerned with its own injuries, Charizard rushed to Yu's side, blinking expectantly. Seeing this, Yu internally complained. But as a professional Pokémon trainer, he didn't let him say anything. Instead, he internally grumbled, "Damn, this Charizard is getting too much. If it weren't for the favor he'd just given him, he'd have wanted to kick him right now." It was because Charizard's current image reminded him of a muscular, hairy man, winking and acting cute at everyone. Could you stand that? He'd probably die of anger or faint from fear. But as Charizard's trainer, Yu forced himself to hold back. Also, as Charizard's trainer, Yu knew exactly what Charizard was thinking at that moment. Okay, I get it. I'll definitely send you out against Moltres. How about you take the lead? Not only that, but if you stay calm and recover and get back to peak form, I'll definitely send you out against the Hyaku gym. Yu knew that Charizard was probably driven by his own same aggressive nature. So, he was just promising him a big promise. As for what the situation would be like then, Yu himself didn't know. After all, it would take time to see how well they recovered. Oh my, Charizard, surprisingly, didn't have those ulterior motives. Knowing it would definitely be a spot on the field, its previously tense heart began to race slightly. It barked with joy, even temporarily forgetting its earlier fear of the three women. It only knew its trainer had promised it that once its physical condition had returned to peak, it would have a chance to fight. After all, it had evolved a while ago, and only had it engaged in a few fierce clashes with Moltres in the early days. But now, it was confined to bed, recovering. Even with its hand in good shape, it still couldn't fight. Not to mention its own training rack, even its friends wouldn't approve. And not to mention Miss Joy, with whom they weren't particularly close. Even if he sneaked out, Miss Joy wouldn't lend them her battle area. While thinking so excitedly in his heart, Charizard did not forget to wink slightly at his friends who were already stunned at the moment. Chapter 840 Dream Ideas. Pikachu Gyarados. Seeing Charizard's smug expression, all the Pokémon were filled with hatred, eager to charge and bash its head off. They hadn't expected that their plan to trick Charizard would actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise for the creature. Could this be the saying of fool's luck is a fool's luck? Actually, Charizard's method of irritating its comrades who had tricked it was quite effective. At least for Yu's group, who had become obsessed with battle after spending so much time with him, each one was extremely belligerent. Especially for those of them who were powerful, they still wanted to fight against those of their own level, or even stronger. Such a battle was almost a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for those of their level. Normal roadside battles were just like monster farming for them, only monsters of Moltres' caliber would they be tempted to engage. Or perhaps the current gym tournaments would be just as effective. After all, while they might be powerful and have a strong roster, Gym trainers will also grow stronger, right? Besides, don't really think those gym trainers are just cannon fodder, defeated by their trainers to earn badges. But for those truly capable of defending an entire city, how weak could their true strength truly be? Even those gym families, with centuries of heritage, possess profound heritage. Near elite-level Pokémon are commonplace, and there should be no shortage of elite-level Pokémon and even 1 or 2 Grand Champion-level Pokémon. Therefore, this presents them with a chance to challenge, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But at this point, Pikachu and the others are helpless. After all, they were responsible for all this. They truly hadn't anticipated such a swift turn of events. But this was probably only a good thing for outright battle-crazed Pokémon like Charizard and Gyarados. After all, it would be utterly impossible for Pokémon like Pikachu or Suicune to withstand the hostility of the 3 women. Especially since Charizard, as they saw it, was showing off to them as if nothing had happened. Overall, they were still feeling somewhat discouraged. Seeing this, their trainer, Yu, naturally understood their thoughts. Unable to resist a soft chuckle, he soothed them. Alright, don't be so dejected. It's not like there won't be opportunities for you to play. If there is, we'll let you all play. The Pokémon, all pure in their hearts, immediately regained their spirits at the trainer's reassurance. Yu, seeing that Xiao's matter had finally come to a satisfactory conclusion, Yu breathed a sigh of relief. However, Serena and the other 2 girls weren't about to let him off the hook. They shouted in unison, hands on their hips, staring intently at Yu. Yu shuddered with fear, letting out a faintly embarrassed sound before dashing out, escaping the scene with lightning speed. Yu, wait a minute, Yu, don't run. If you don't explain this clearly, we'll keep pestering you, Serena and the others shouted, leaving the Pokémon staring at each other in bewilderment in the room. Time slipped slowly as Xiaozhi and the others embarked on their journeys. Yu and his Pokémon began to rest and recuperate at the Pokémon Center in Big City. After a few days of recuperation, Pikachu and the others' injuries had mostly healed, and their condition had returned to normal. Whenever Yu stayed in one place for too long, he would usually video call Professor Oak. This served as a way to reassure him that he was safe, share his experiences during his travels, and let him know how his journey was progressing, so he wouldn't worry. Thus, he naturally knew that Satoshi, Shigeki, his senior sister, and his childhood sweetheart had all embarked on journeys to various regions. Furthermore, they were all traveling to different regions to pursue their goals and fulfill their dreams, hoping to avoid meeting in the finals and ultimately claim the Pinnacle Championship. After all, their goal was to win the League Championship. While the situation varied from region to region, some might face weaker opponents with luck, while others might face stronger opponents with less luck. But overall, the league's regional competitions were relatively competitive. After all, as an official league competition, even if the players were more skilled, how would they fare compared to those in other regions? However, Professor Oak was quite foresighted and had a clear understanding of the various regional alliance structures. This was why he had assigned everyone to different regions for the travel event. Separating them did have its advantages, it prevented them from meeting each other prematurely. Their struggles would only be more interesting after they had fully grown. Yu was quite shocked when he heard the news. After all, he had anticipated Li Zuner and Chen Kalen's travel to challenge the regional alliance competition. He had expected them to find him in Kalos and join him on the journey, but they didn't. Instead, they followed Professor Oak's advice and headed to other regions. This was what really shocked him. But thinking about it, he felt a sense of relief. After all, it had only been a short while since the events had occurred. Even though it had been so long, Yu still wasn't mentally prepared. His original plan was to win the Kalos League competition, receive the championship trophy, and return to his long-absent hometown with a small measure of glory. He would prove to those who had protected him that he was strong enough and no longer needed to rely on their sacrifices. Instead, he just wanted to tell them that this was just the beginning, that his strength was far greater than this, and that sooner or later he would become a towering tree, protecting those who had protected him before. Chapter 841 Special Training. He wanted to prove to those who had protected him that he was strong enough, no longer needing to rely on them for sacrifice. Instead, he simply wanted to tell them that this was just the beginning, that his strength was far greater than this, that sooner or later he would become a towering tree, protecting those who had once protected him. This was the only thought that remained in Yu's mind at that moment. Indeed, Until he had gained sufficient strength to prove himself, Yu still lacked the courage to face those who had once protected him and therefore been misunderstood. After all, seeing them would often remind him of his own cowardice and ignorance. At the same time, a sense of urgency arose within him, a sense that hadn't arisen without reason. With this thought, Yu's gaze suddenly grew firm as he looked forward, and his hands clenched into fists. He longed to be strong, to become powerful, to possess immense strength. He longed to use this immense strength to protect those he cared about, to prove himself with it. Yu believed the only shortcut to achieving this powerful condition was through constant battles with other powerful trainers and Pokémon. This would allow both him and his Pokémon to grow stronger together. After all, only with great strength could one have the confidence to succeed. Besides strengthening oneself through battles with Pokémon and trainers, there was another shortcut, finding some powerful and well-qualified Pokémon. However, on the planet where this person and Pokémon lived, the number of Pokémon was simply too great. Even Pokémon with relatively rare qualities existed. In fact, if one had the right channels, any Pokémon with any desired qualities would be available. Therefore, in this era, highly qualified Pokémon might still be quite rare, but it was becoming less so. At least every powerful trainer had a Pokémon with a high caliber. When everyone started from the same point, the only thing that mattered was hard work and perseverance. Therefore, in Yu's opinion, the quality of a Pokémon did have some influence, but it wasn't significant. After all, nothing is impossible for those who set their minds to it. This saying also applies to Pokémon. There's even a saying in the Pokémon world, even though Caterpillar may seem weak, it will eventually become Rayquaza. Just like the water-type Pokémon, Magikarp and Skaven, they might not be very powerful in their current state, or even have mediocre talents. But with hard work and various factors, if they evolve, one will become the most beautiful Pokémon. The other will become one of the most powerful and terrifying water-type Pokémon. Therefore, all they lack is the leap to greatness. Moreover, he now possesses a legendary beast. Although it can only be a pseudo-legendary beast, its potential and talents are still enormous. Thinking of this, Yu couldn't help but feel a little excited. But his excitement wasn't just about owning a legendary beast like Suicune. It was that he couldn't wait to start a battle. That's right, a Pokémon battle. After a few days of recuperation, the injuries of the Pokémon, led by Pikachu and Moltres, had almost fully recovered. Yu was continuing his usual special training with Pikachu and the other Pokémon. As for Moltres, because it was a legendary beast, it was still in the hospital room and hadn't come out. After all, if a legendary Moltres suddenly appeared at the Pokémon Center, it would undoubtedly cause a huge sensation. Even though Yu wasn't a professional, he could foresee that once the news got out, the media would likely arrive in a matter of minutes. As someone whose training was heavily involved with Moltres, he would likely be in trouble again. Okay, Pikachu, that's all for today's special training. You guys should get some rest. Next, I'll go find Moltres and discuss our battle. After letting Pikachu and the others adjust their training, Yu returned to the hospital room alone, looking for Moltres to discuss the upcoming reconciliation. After all, dragging things out like this wasn't a good idea. Besides battling Moltres, he also had a gym challenge to complete. After all, if he could obtain the gym badge for the Big Gym, he would be just one step away from qualifying for the Pokémon League, the final badge. How could Yu not be excited? Therefore, Yu didn't want to waste a moment. He hurried back to the Pokémon Center's ward and conferred with the Moltres, who had now woken up and was resting nearby. They agreed to wait an hour for a refresher before the battle began. Yu didn't even bother with breakfast, returning to his Pokémon's presence to help them get back to peak form. To defeat Moltres, their former rival, Pikachu and the others didn't disappoint. Each of them put their all into training, sweating profusely. This scene truly created a unique scene in the Pokémon Center's backyard. But the forest was vast, and there were all sorts of birds. Passers-by simply glanced at the birds, not stopping to watch, and walked on. Even the trainers at the Pokémon Center only took a few glances, showing no interest. After all, they'd rather train on their own than spend that time there. Yu paid no attention to the looks and gestures of those around him, continuing his training with the Pokémon. If Serena and the other two hadn't forced him to eat, Yu would likely still be training with the Pokémon with all his heart. Initially, Yu had been somewhat reluctant and resistant. After all, after completely losing himself in the process, the Pokémon were happily training, their energy at peak. Bakir's next words completely dispelled his thoughts. You, don't you have to battle molters later? Even if you're not hungry, Pikachu and the others are probably hungry after training all morning. After all, they're the main characters later on. Chapter 842 The Battle Begins. By K-City, Stadium. After Yu had breakfast with his Pokémon, he brought them here, having finally gotten Moltres' consent. Although Moltres was somewhat reluctant, since it was already in its Pokéball, it would be a shame not to make good use of it. This was why Yu didn't dwell on it. After all, he was going to battle Moltres first, and Moltres was a legendary beast. If it appeared in a public place like the Pokémon Center, it would likely cause quite a stir. This was why, after Yu had inquired with Miss Joy about the stadium in K City, he had brought Pikachu and the others there. The upcoming battle would take place there, and with the administrator's permission, the entire roof could be opened to reveal the vast sky. Moltres was, after all, a flying-type Pokémon, and only by giving it ample space to fly could it truly display its true strength. As for the audience this time, there weren't many people, just Serena and the other two girls and their Pokémon as spectators. All of this was specifically requested by Yu. As you can imagine, meeting these rather demanding conditions would come at a considerable cost. It's true that Yu couldn't afford it, considering the exorbitant rent for the stadium itself. Furthermore, they would be conducting Pokémon battles there, which would inevitably cause damage to the venue. Fortunately, there was a hidden wealthy woman among them, Aor. Upon learning of Yu's concerns, she immediately contacted the stadium administrator and made all the necessary arrangements for him. After repeatedly confirming that there were no unexpected incidents, Yu tossed all his Pokéballs into the air without a second thought. After witnessing his action, Serena and the other two girls didn't hesitate at all. Kixie tossed their Pokéballs into the air, including both their own and those Yu had left with him. Crisp explosions echoed, and flashes of red light flashed. When they faded completely, figures appeared within the stadium. Among them was Moltres. However, perhaps for a special reason, Yu had Moltres' Pokéball on him, along with his primary Pokémon. Upon seeing the vast stadium, all the Pokémon cheered with overwhelming excitement. Some flying Pokémon, upon seeing the boundless expanse of the sky, couldn't help but spread their wings, soaring freely. Even Moltres was no exception, as if warming up before a battle. They all began to adjust their moods and states. Among them, Moltres soared with remarkable grace, unmistakably a mythical beast. Circles of visible sparks began to spread in all directions as its wings flapped. Serena and the others, though merely spectators, weren't simply sitting there, watching the action. They immediately began helping with preparations. What were they preparing for? Of course, it was about rescuing Pokémon. Each of them checked their supplies to make sure they had all the necessary medicine. After all, they didn't want this battle to end like the initial one, with each of them covered in wounds and suffering a crushing defeat. Therefore, they had to be thoroughly prepared. Therefore, when Yu went out, he leveraged his sister's connections to secure a large amount of Pokémon medical supplies from Miss Joy. Furthermore, Yu had some medical knowledge. Although his medical skills had primarily focused on humans, he did have some understanding of angry Pokémon. Xiaoxu was also an excellent Pokémon breeder. For a good Pokémon breeder, helping injured Pokémon recover was a natural skill. After all, Xiaoxu had once won the Pokémon Breeder Championship. She knew a bit of basic first aid and medical knowledge. With everything ready, Yu looked towards the Pokémon still recovering. "How is it going, Pikachu? Are you ready for a fight now?" Pikachu Gyarados Yu's four strongest Pokémon responded to their trainer's question one by one, their fighting spirit blazing. A closer look revealed a burning desire in their eyes. Okay, as if influenced by the Pokémon spirit, Yu touched his nose with a slightly uninhibited air, his fighting spirit also high. The excitement of the battle was instantly ignited to its highest level. "Molten, how is it going?" "We're already here," Yu shouted to the Moltres across from him. In response to Yu's question, Moltres merely let out a high-pitched cry. Though not fluent in Pokémon language, in the current atmosphere, Yu somehow understood the sentiment Moltres was conveying. "You said you were ready too, so we'll be coming anytime, right?" Yu bluntly expressed his understanding of Moltres' cry. Moltres showed no surprise or astonishment at Yu's ability to read his thoughts. It simply flapped its flaming wings vigorously, sending up ripples of flame. At the same time, Its original cry became even more high-pitched. Yu was stunned by this, not instantly understanding Moltres' meaning as he had just before. Instead, the Pokémon, already high in spirits, became even more agitated after hearing Moltres' cry. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 843 Unwilling. Flame Moltres' cry became even higher. Yu was stunned for a moment, not instantly understanding Moltres' meaning as he had just before. Instead, the Pokémon, already high in spirits, became even more agitated after hearing Moltres' cry. Pikagyaratus out shui shui what? Moltres, what exactly are you trying to say? Everyone, calm down, Yu now loudly questioned his confusion, while also trying to calm his Pokémon. He was truly surprised by how agitated his Pokémon became at the mere sound of Moltres' cry. Their faces showed a reckless urge to charge, yet they were suppressing it. Suicune was the one who surprised him the most. Perhaps because he was the incarnation of the North Wind, Suicune's personality was naturally quite peaceful. Coupled with the inherent state of mind that comes with being a divine beast, he was indifferent to certain things, even managing to remain calm in the face of danger. At this moment, he was acting like two hot-tempered Pokémon, Gyarados and Charizard. Perhaps even more so. Suicune, completely disregarding his divine beast image, bared his teeth directly at Moltres. It seemed as if Moltres appeared before Suicune, Suicune would charge in and engage in a fight without regard for his appearance. In response to Yu's question, which was tinged with confusion, Moltres didn't respond as usual. Instead, he stared intently at the Pokémon, especially Suicune, who had barked the loudest and reacted most ferociously. Its glare was barely concealed, as if it saw nothing more than an ant it could easily crush, not a divine beast of its own rank. Faced with Moltres' attitude, Yu hadn't even made a move or react, but the Pokémon, led by Suicune, grew even more agitated. What the hell is going on? Why are all the Pokémon suddenly so agitated? Serena, watching from the sidelines, was equally puzzled, turning to Xiaoxu, who was more knowledgeable about Pokémon, and asked, I'm confused. What on earth is Pikachu talking about? Why would their emotions suddenly change so drastically? Xiaoxu rested her hand on her chin, lost in thought. But then her eyes lit up, a look of sudden enlightenment. I think I might already know the answer to this. What do you mean, Xiaoxu? You said you already know the answer? Then hurry up and tell us, let's hear it, just as Serena, in her usual Xiaoxu form, asked her to explain her speculation. Yu, watching the Pokémon of both sides continue to stalemate, seemed to understand something as well. He immediately shook his head, feeling somewhat amused. His Pokémon's personalities were truly like his own. Molten, I thought you were just saying that Pikachu and the others should attack together? And the battle you want with us isn't a one-on-one, but a group fight. Yu unleashed his speculation without hesitation. Flame Moltres' eyes lit up at Yu's suggestion, but he didn't react. He simply held his head high, as if waiting for their attack. Having fully understood what Molten's message was, he wasn't surprised at Suicune and Pikachu's subsequent actions. After all, put yourself in their shoes. Perhaps Moltres is truly formidable, believing Pikachu and the others are no match for it. It's for this reason that it mobilized all its Pokémon to battle it. But the Pokémon Yu commanded shared his own personalities, equally stubborn. They viewed Moltres' actions as a sign of utter contempt, so how could they tolerate such behavior? Furthermore, Suicune and Moltres were both legendary beasts. Wasn't Moltres' behavior a humiliation to Suicune? At first, Yu might have considered such behavior unfair, even unacceptable. But after traveling for so long, he'd experienced and seen more. He'd finally let go of what he had seen. For him now, there was no such thing as fairness or injustice. Moreover, in the Pokémon world, the winner reigned supreme, the loser the enemy. Strength was everything. Only with sufficient strength could you change that. Yu didn't think Moltres' behavior was a big deal. He even thought about it from her perspective, thinking that if it were him, he would probably do the same. Because you have enough strength, because you are powerful enough. So you can do this to someone who is weaker than you. If Charizard or Suicune were strong enough, Moltres wouldn't have acted like this. They would have been treated as opponents with caution. After all, facing an opponent of equal strength, even a single move could lead to failure. After figuring it all out, Yu felt helpless and amused, but at this moment, he still offered words of comfort. Alright, Pikachu, don't be angry. Who told you to be weaker than Moltres? If you are stronger than Moltres, you could do the same. If you're not, then just accept your fate. Pikachu water. As if trainer Yu's words had taken effect, the Pikachus and their companions calmed down, only to look at Yu with a hint of resignation. It was as if they were responding to what Yu had said before. Yes, all this was ultimately caused by their own weakness. So weak that they had no right to choose. Chapter 844, Charizard goes to battle. Alright, stop looking at me like that. Instead of that, why don't you just become stronger? Only when you're stronger will others take you seriously. Yu, seemingly unable to bear the pitiful looks from Pikachu and the others, quickly offered soothing words. Since you're asking, Moltres, to take on Pikachu all by yourself, then neither I nor Pikachu will hold back. We're going to get serious, indeed. After so much travel and witnessing all sorts of events, Yu's personality had changed considerably. After encountering something like Moltres, he wouldn't suffer for the sake of prestige or persistence. All he wanted now was to be a jerk who wouldn't take advantage of an opportunity. He was determined to defeat the enemy and make them suffer. Flame Moltres still let out a fearless cry at this moment. Alright, if that's the case, Pikachu, you go ahead. Yu gave the order without hesitation. However, this time, facing the order from their trainer, Pikachu and the other Pokémon, while not as reluctant as before, showed hesitation. Ultimately, it was the pride that was at work. After all, no Pokémon or trainer wanted to win unfairly. Therefore, after a moment of silence, the Pokémon, led by Pikachu and Suicune, all took a slight step back. Only Charizard, still standing motionless, stepped forward and confronted Moltres. So, you still want to uphold your principles? Yu was honestly feeling a complicated feeling. On the one hand, he was a little angry at Pikachu for not listening to his orders. On the other hand, he was also somewhat relieved. After all, the Pokémon had never given up their determination because of their trainer. However, since the Pokémon had made such a decision, Yu chose to respect Pikachu's own decision. After all, it was a good thing for Pokémon to be able to control themselves and have their own ideas. Not relying on the trainer for a long time was actually the idea that Yu had always instilled in Pikachu. As for why Pikachu chose to let Charizard fight, not long ago, facing Charizard's smug look, didn't they still grit their teeth and look very angry? How come they can change their expressions so quickly now, almost faster than girls? There were 3 reasons for this. First, Yu had already agreed to let Charizard play, and Pikachu and the others were present. Although they looked resigned and even a little indignant, that was simply a sign of their good relationship. In reality, they respected their trainer's decision. Furthermore, they didn't want to fight to jeopardize their relationship. As for the second reason, it was simply because after evolving into Charizard, it gained the ability to fly, almost identical to Moltres. After all, not to mention their dual stats of fire and flight, this alone would have made it more or less unacceptable for the other Pokémon to enhance it. After all, for Charizard, this was a form of training and improvement. The Pokémon were happy to see such an opportunity presented to their companions, and naturally, they wouldn't compete for it. As for the third point, it's absolutely true. It's because of Charizard's current strength. While many Pokémon may be reluctant to admit this, it's undeniable that Charizard is currently Yu's strongest Pokémon. Of course, Pikachu, Suicune, and Gyarados, the 3 most powerful Pokémon, might still be able to fight Charizard. But they'll still have to pay a price. Furthermore, Pikachu and the others are able to fight Charizard precisely because they have a stat advantage. After evolving into Charizard, Charizard not only possesses the fire attribute, but also the flying attribute, which is countered by electric. Suicune and Gyarados, on the other hand, completely dominate with their water attribute advantage. Of course, while they have a certain stat advantage, they don't necessarily guarantee a win against Charizard. After all, in a real fight, Charizard isn't a pushover, ready to be exploited by other Pokémon. Therefore, under these circumstances, Charizard had no choice but to lead the charge. Furthermore, the evolved Charizard was currently on par with the Moltres. Even if it couldn't defeat Moltres, it would at least have drained most of its energy. Then, whether it was Pikachu, Suicune, or Gyarados, any one of them should be able to gain an advantage. After all, Moltres' current situation was coincidentally similar to Charizard's. Despite having considerable strength, it was still the underdog in terms of stats. Charizard's on the field? Goodness! I've been wanting to try this for a while now. A head-to-head matchup between Charizard and Silver Moltres is truly exciting. Yu saw the Pokémon's intentions, but even the thought of it only made his blood boil. Charizard didn't disappoint Yu, roaring to the heavens, sending waves of visible sonic energy radiating outward. A thick, scorching jet of flame erupted from its mouth. This was fortunate, as the gymnasium's roof had already been opened. Otherwise, just this single jet of flame would have cost Yu a significant amount of Alliance coins. After all, for a poor man like Yu, that amount of Alliance coins was no small sum, especially since the battle hadn't even begun. Chapter 845, Cast on Earth. Ouch! An invisible sound began to spread outward, even within the stadium itself, causing objects to drift in all directions. Even facing such a ferocious attack, Moltres acted as if it hadn't noticed a thing. Its sharp gaze remained fixed on Charizard. A closer look revealed a deep, stern expression. It seemed the intimidating power emanating from Charizard had already intimidated Moltres. It seemed Moltres was now beginning to take Charizard seriously. Pikachu and the others remained, holding the field as a defensive presence. After all, their trainer had been right, they were simply too weak. Without the power to change, they could only submit, crushing them and causing their opponents to suffer a setback. Since Moltres is so generous, we can't be polite, Charizard. Let's go first and use Jet of Fire. Yu began by having Charizard use its signature move, Jet of Fire. True to its name, Jet of Fire was effortless for Charizard. A thick blaze of fire swept directly towards Moltres. Facing the dragon-like Jet of Fire, Moltres remained unfazed, possessing its own methods of response. With a single movement, Jet of Fire erupted from its mouth. As expected, the two dragons met in midair, fiercely colliding. In an instant, the two dragons were entangled, and the jets of fire that had been a stalemate for a moment burst and dissipated. A surprising evenly matched result. However, neither Yu nor the Pokémon expressed any surprise at this scene. Yu followed closely behind, immediately issuing another order. Moltres wasn't far behind, and after a brief moment of adjustment, it immediately unleashed its own skill. Charizard, use Fire Vortex. Unlike Charizard's previous attack, this time, Charizard's flames resembled a swirling cage of flame, directly enveloping Moltres. Moltres, facing the encircling and entangled flame vortex, simply flapped its wings vigorously, as if oblivious to the force. Its entire body instantly soared, its flames spreading outward, gradually enveloping Moltres. Furthermore, facing the flame vortex, Moltres, after enveloping itself with Energy Feast, suddenly increased its speed and began to spin. As Moltres spun, the flames that had once resembled a swirling ball of flame were instantly pierced through. Having broken through Fire Vortex, Moltres continued to gather momentum, charging directly towards Charizard. Yu, a seasoned Pokémon trainer, instinctively commanded after seeing Moltres break Charizard's attack. Charizard, block it with continuous slashing. Ouch! While this could technically be considered Charizard's first battle since evolving, it's unclear if it's due to talent or simply innate. Shortly after evolving into Charizard, it had already adapted to flight. Seeing Moltres break its vortex of flames, it quickly adjusted its form, stabilizing itself completely. Its claws glowed white. Not caring if Moltres was engulfed in flames from its energy-accumulating state, it waited until Moltres approached and, without hesitation, swung its claws, slashing fiercely at Moltres. Faced with this sudden attack, Moltres' reaction was truly swift. He immediately unleashed a wing attack, crashing directly into Charizard's split. The muffled sound of flesh colliding echoed, and both Pokémon were thrown back. Do you think you can defeat us like this? Charizard, don't give up. You split, flame as if challenging Yu and Charizard. Moltres also responded with a similar counterattack. There were no fancy attacks, just the most primitive collisions. Muffled sounds echoed in the air, and white light continued to separate and merge in the collision. After another collision, both sides were once again repelled, and the two, unwilling to give in, collided once more. This time, after witnessing the scene, Yu did not order Charizard to continue using the same move. Instead, a charming smile curved his lips, and a cunning glint flickered in his eyes. Charizard, take advantage of this opportunity and use Earth Throw. It must be said that while Pokemon possess intelligence, they are still somewhat weaker than humans. Otherwise, the profession of Pokemon trainer wouldn't exist. As expected, after hearing their master's command, Charizard's next clash with Moltres wasn't as explosive as usual. Instead, Moltres and Charizard were locked in a fierce entanglement. It would be more accurate to say Charizard was clinging to Moltres. Seizing the perfect moment to scoop Moltres up, Charizard, without hesitation, launched into rapid flight. The speed was so great that it flew right out of the stadium, spinning so rapidly in mid-air that a faint spherical shadow could be seen. With a clang, the spherical shadow began to disappear, and Charizard began to plummet again. Faced with this sudden scene, Moltres immediately reacted with a struggle. The flames sprayed directly onto Charizard without hesitation or mercy. However, despite the damage caused by the flames, Charizard remained firmly clasped around Moltres, fearing that if he suddenly let go, Moltres would fly away. But it was indeed possible. Chapter 846, Moltres vs Charizard. Facing the damage from the flames blasting at it, Charizard forcibly held on to Moltres, fearing that if it suddenly let go, Moltres would fly away. But, come to think of it, that possibility was real. After circling its spherical shadow for a few times, Charizard's form began to descend rapidly. Facing the sudden, rapid descent, on the verge of a close encounter with the floor, Charizard's gaze remained unchanged from beginning to end. Even the constant stream of Moltres' flames, which had just struck it, hadn't altered its mood. This was an unwavering resolve, a determination to succeed or die. A determination to die in glory rather than live in disgrace. That was the madness. Or perhaps, apart from Charizard, all of you use Pokemon dared to be so reckless. Without a trace of retreat or fear in its eyes, Charizard flapped its wings, gathering momentum. Flammabird's eyes flashed with panic as they were getting closer and closer to the ground. Even if he could break free from Charizard's grasp, flapping his wings and flying away would be difficult. Even if he could manage to flap his wings in a pinch, he'd likely still take some damage. After all, Earth Throw requires thorough preparation. In the later stages, unless you have a clever way to evade it, you'll still be in serious harm. Clearly, I didn't have a clever countermeasure for a second, and I was still held tightly in Charizard's arms. Bang! A dull thud echoed. Moltres, still mulling over a way to escape, suddenly felt a pain in her body, her head fuzzy, and she briefly lost consciousness. It turned out that even as Moltres was thinking, Charizard had already completed the Earth Throw's follow-up. Without mercy or hesitation, he slammed Moltres forward, sending her crashing to the ground. The stadium floor was incredibly sturdy. After all, besides the usual workouts, there were also competitions with Pokemon. After all, this was a Pokemon world, and people's sports weren't monotonous, they were accompanied by Pokemon. For all these reasons, the stadium floor was incredibly sturdy. Yet, even with this in mind, when Moltres was slammed back by Charizard, a small dent was left in the floor, and a closer look revealed spiderweb-like cracks. Good opportunity, Charizard. Use another flame jet. Neither Air nor Charizard, faced with such a situation, would miss such a good opportunity. They didn't give Moltres a second to breathe, but immediately pressed forward. Even before you could issue any orders, Charizard eagerly raised its head, and wisps of flame began to gather in its mouth. This clearly showed that, after so much training, Charizard had developed a strong fighting spirit. Even when merely awaiting its master's command, it involuntarily prepared its abilities. After confirming the order was correct, it unleashed a merciless jet of fire, striking Moltres head first. Moltres, still dazed, had no time to react and took the full force of the jet. However, due to its fire-based nature, Moltres only sustained minimal damage. This very attack, however, completely awakened the dazed Moltres. Moltres' resurgence was swift. After a high-pitched cry, it gave a powerful flap of its wings, and instantly, using its power, it took flight. Moltres' flight was incredibly fast, and the moment Charizard reacted, Moltres had already regained its composure, assuming a vengeful stance. It's true, however, that Moltres no longer holds any contempt. After all, from their brief encounter, Moltres could already tell that Charizard's strength was now almost equal to its own. So, why had Charizard been defeated so easily before? It was because Charmeleon, after evolving into Charizard, didn't regain its peak strength through its own evolution. Instead, the evolution consumed some of its energy, leading to the evolutionary Charizard's defeat. But the situation now is completely different. Charizard's evolution had not only significantly increased its strength and speed, but had also leapt to the same level as Moltres. However, the evolution took so little time. While Charizard's abilities had improved significantly in all areas, it hadn't had time to adapt to the sudden surge in power. Consequently, Charizard hadn't yet fully unleashed its current strength. Therefore, Moltres didn't need to be overly fearful. After all, as a divine beast, it possessed inherent advantages in both physical strength and stamina. After recalibrating its mindset and composure, Moltres, like a fierce warrior, spun with a spinning attack, charging towards Charizard at lightning speed. Faced with Moltres' sudden attack, coupled with its own immense speed, Charizard had no time to react. He felt a sharp pain in his back, and his body plummeted. Fortunately, Charizard was a veteran, and after only an initial moment of shock, he quickly reacted. Controlling his somewhat unfamiliar wings, he flapped them repeatedly. Relying on the immense wind force generated by his wings, Charizard quickly stabilized his form and launched a counterattack. As he soared on his massive wings, a turquoise hue began to condense on his short claws. With another sharp backward swing, a pair of massive claws materialized from thin air. Chapter 847 Accident. With another sudden backward swing, a pair of enormous claws materialized out of thin air. The once short claws seemed to be covered in giant claw guards, their 3 emerald green claws emitting a chilling, cold light. What else could this be but Dragon Claw? With another powerful flap of its wings, Charizard, as if possessed of thrusters, instantly reached Moltres. But Moltres, of course, wouldn't sit still. It once again flared its steel-like wings and fiercely engaged Charizard's 2 wings. The sound of steel clashing echoed, and perhaps due to the sheer power of the attack, an explosion echoed in the air. Simultaneously, a cloud of dust enveloped the 2 Pokémon. A gentle breeze blew away the dust that had completely obscured the area of air. The 2 Pokémon were locked in a stalemate, each using their own abilities to draw strength, each unwilling to yield. Charizard's claws pressed down on Moltres, and then Moltres pressed back, each clashing with strength. This gradually deepened into a stalemate, the 2 Pokémon seemingly frozen in place, frozen in midair. If it weren't for their faint gasps and the movement of their eyes, proving they weren't statues, they would have been considered magnificent works of art. Molten, you're truly powerful. But precisely because of this, I'm even more determined to convince you to become our partner. Far from feeling the slightest bit discouraged, Yi Yu's fighting spirit flared. A flicker of fire ignited in his eyes. Charizard, don't give up. Use flame spray. Since they were already in a stalemate, and Moltres wasn't trying to break it, they were on their own. Therefore, Yi Yu showed no mercy. After all, in a Pokémon battle, the best way to show respect to your opponent is to give your all. Yi Yu had always believed this. Yi Yu wasn't going to be nice because he liked Moltres and wanted to capture it and make it his lapdog. After all, as the saying goes, lapdogs, 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 until they're left with nothing. Yi Yu didn't want to let his carelessness, or his gentleness towards Moltres, lead to his own defeat. Failure would be one thing, but failure would mean all his Pokémon would lose their combat capability. Losing their combat capability would mean their Pokémon would be injured, or even fall into coma. Yi Yu had no intention of letting his Pokémon bear the consequences of his own mistakes. Therefore, no matter what the outcome, he had to give it his all. Upon hearing his trainer's command, Charizard reacted swiftly, unleashing a jet of flames without a second thought, charging straight at Moltres. By this time, Moltres had also learned its lesson, appearing to have been fully prepared for Charizard. Or perhaps, after the recent setback, it had become even more cautious. Just as Charizard was about to unleash its jet of flames, Moltres, as if forewarned, seemed to anticipate it. A stream of flames gathered at its mouth. Boom! Flame! Ouch! The 2 massive flames collided, entwining and entwining. A scorching sensation rippled through the air, making it seem as if it were ablaze. As the 2 jets of flame collided, the momentum of the force sent both Pokémon flying backwards. Even as they flew backwards, their jets of flames continued to blaze. Very well, Moltres. I have to say you're quite capable. In that case, Charizard, charge. Use your strength to crush them, oh my. After hearing his master's command, which looked like an order, Charizard let out a roar of piercing sound. And with that roar, Charizard's final burst of flames was completely cut short. However, because of this, Charizard withdrew all of its flames, completely opening up its own opening. Although it had completely abandoned its defense, Charizard had no intention of giving up, for there's always the quiet before the storm. Suddenly, Charizard's claws once again formed emerald green claws, and a faint white light shone from its wings. Charizard was ready to go all out. Without the support and resistance of Charizard's flames, Moltres' flames effortlessly advanced in Charizard's direction. As Charizard's flames, emanating from a fire dragon, drew ever closer, Charizard showed no sign of avoiding them. Instead, it charged head-on into the direction of the flames. Ah, what's Charizard doing? Charizard, be careful! Serena and the other two, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Even Xiaoxu, who wasn't particularly well versed in Pokémon battles, instinctively covered her eyes with her hands, unwilling to witness the tragic scene she knew Charizard would suffer. However, Xiaoxu was puzzled by the fact that she had waited so long without hearing any screams. Her hands, which had been covering her eyes, opened slightly. Through the gaps between her fingers, Xiaoxu could clearly see what was happening outside. At that moment, Moltres' flames had reached Charizard. But Charizard, like four divine weapons, began to swirl and cut the flames from all four directions, with white and green light constantly interweaving and swirling. Even Moltres hadn't reacted yet, having never expected Charizard to suddenly give up the attack. Chapter 848, Flamebird's Fury. Charizard, like four divine weapons, began swirling and cutting its jets of flame from all directions, upward, downward, left, and right. White and blue light swirled endlessly. Even Moltres hadn't reacted yet, having never expected Charizard to suddenly abandon its attack. It was a truly unexpected scene. Moltres had never expected Charizard to completely abandon its defense and instead throw its full weight into the attack. After all, even with Charizard's fire attribute, it would inevitably suffer some damage from the powerful jets of flame. Furthermore, in such a situation, if Charizard wasn't careful, the situation would be a bottomless abyss. Yet, despite this gamble, Charizard charged forward without hesitation. Even at the moment its trainer gave the order, Charizard seemed to know no fear and charged forward without hesitation. After all, Charizard was so effortlessly multitasking, unleashing two abilities. But Charizard wasn't quite adept at multitasking. It was barely even at the point of gaining a foothold, yet even in this state, it still managed to execute such a reckless strategy. Wild Pokémon are, after all, just wild Pokémon. Even Moltres, a legendary Pokémon, couldn't escape the shackles of being wild. The reason Pokémon and their trainers must obey their trainers' orders and follow new circumstances is entirely due to humans' profound intelligence and exceptional ability to control the battle. As the saying goes, a bystander sees more clearly. From a bystander's perspective, they can offer valuable insights into the battle between two Pokémon. Of course, there are also some powerful Pokémon whose trainers lack the qualifications and strength to control the battle, and therefore, they may disobey their trainers' orders. However, there are also some Pokémon with more independent minds. While they fully trust their trainers' orders, they still have their own independent judgment about battle and won't blindly follow their trainers' orders. It is precisely because of this that the cooperation between trainer and Pokémon can truly unleash the Pokémon's immense strength. This power is far more than just 1 + 1 = 2. After all, an outsider's perspective always understands the Pokémon's physical condition much better than the Pokémon itself. Only from an outsider's perspective can one truly appreciate the immense potential of a Pokémon. Pokémon can be likened to the door to a mysterious treasure trove, and the trainer is the key that opens it. Only through the coordinated efforts of the trainers can this treasure trove be fully unlocked. Well, Moltres, without its trainer, is particularly disadvantaged at this moment. If Moltres had a seasoned trainer at its helm, it would surely not have suffered such a severe loss. After all, a seasoned trainer would have reacted quickly to such a situation and ordered their Pokémon to counterattack. It was just that it was ultimately a little too late. But for Yu, it wasn't too late. After all, once Charizard defeated Moltres, Moltres would no longer be fighting alone. They would become complete partners. However, all this presupposed Charizard could defeat Moltres. Or rather, Charizard and the others could defeat Moltres. Although the lack of a trainer had caused Moltres to suffer a loss, allowing Moltres to take another solid beating from Charizard, For Moltres, this was perhaps just the beginning of warm-up exercises. Legendary beasts were still legendary beasts. Especially wild ones. Facing Moltres, Yu had to admit that Suicune, a fellow legendary beast, was indeed inferior to Moltres in terms of self-awareness. Even in terms of sheer combat experience, Moltres had more. After all, surviving in the wild wasn't like navigating the city. Wild Pokémon faced the harshest environments and the most brutal laws of nature. It's easy to imagine that Moltres was merely eating Charizard, a trainer's fault. Without a trainer's guidance, even if Pikachu, Suicune, and the rest of the Pokémon were to join forces, not to mention Charizard alone, they wouldn't be able to match Moltres' strength. After being sent flying by Charizard once again, Moltres finally seemed to be unable to endure it, feeling deeply humiliated. After all, it was a legendary beast, and to be beaten so utterly by Charmeleon was a disgrace. Consequently, Moltres felt a certain anger and hostility towards Charizard, something that other Pokémon might not have felt. But Charizard was a surprise, possessing both fire and flying attributes. It would have been fine if it weren't for those two attributes, but they coincided with Moltres' own. This gave the impression of being identical, as if there were no differences at all, the only differences being superficial. It was as if Moltres was no longer a legendary Pokémon and Charizard no longer just another ordinary starter Pokémon. It was as if these two legendary Pokémon were equals in status, with no such distinction between ordinary Pokémon, just like the difference between legendary Pokémon and their respective tyres. How could Moltres, a legendary Pokémon, accept this? Thus, Moltres was determined to defeat Charizard at all costs. Moltres also noticed that the opposing trainer, while promising a multi-Pokémon battle, was, for some reason, adopting a round-robin approach, intending to fight each Pokémon one by one. While this approach was far less ethical than a group fight, Moltres, once released, could not be retrieved. Chapter 849, Secret Attack. While the one-by-one Pokémon-to-Pokémon approach, similar to a round-robin battle, seems far less ethical than a group fight, once Moltres has been released, it's naturally impossible to retract it. Ultimately, while Yu's group of Pokémon didn't want to win unfairly, their decision to battle Moltres was already unfair from the moment they first decided to do so. After all, compared to a group attack, a round-robin strategy is far more despicable. After all, a round-robin strategy involves sending in a few strong or weaker opponents to weaken Moltres, making the remaining attacks much easier. However, if a group attacks, Moltres' strength can still somewhat suppress weaker Pokémon. However, precisely because of this, the Pokémon showed a rare bit of wisdom. Instead of competing with Charizard, they willingly let Charizard take the field, simply to drain Moltres' strength and test its current strength. It's true, though. Perhaps Moltres itself had anticipated this, but Yu, one of the protagonists, and his Pokémon certainly hadn't. They still believed their method was relatively fair. After all, treating relatives and wages with such brutality and directness was too harsh. How could the proud Pikachus accept this? At least they felt a little comforted by this round-robin battle. After all, it was still a fair one-on-one fight, albeit slightly altered. After suffering repeated attacks from Charizard, which Moltres considered provocative, Moltres seemed to finally be unable to contain its rage. It let out a loud cry, and a stream of flames began to gather in its mouth. Then, Flamabird suddenly opened its mouth, and the flames shot out. The flames didn't form a straight line like a jet of flame. Instead, they gradually grew larger and larger in the air, finally forming the shape of a large character. This was clearly one of its ultimate fire moves, Big Character Explosion. It seemed Moltres was also anxious, perhaps even blinded by rage. She hadn't hesitated to unleash her flame explosion. You know, even when two attacks of the same attribute intersect, an attack with no counter-attribute is far more effective. But a Fire-type ultimate is still a Fire-type ultimate, and Flame Explosion truly lives up to its title as one of the most powerful Fire-type skills. Compared to other Fire-type skills, it's simply not on the same level, isn't it? Faced with this powerful, oppressive, and overwhelming Flame Explosion, Charizard, though terrified, certainly wouldn't sit still and wait for death. Without hesitation, she unleashed her signature Flame Spray to block the attack. However, this Flame Spray, normally a surefire weapon for Charizard, was ineffective against Flame Explosion. As the two skills collided in mid-air, their power and strength were stalemate. Perhaps due to its explosive power, at the moment of contact between Jet Flame and Big Explosion, Jet Flame's force even surpassed Big Explosion's. However, even this couldn't compensate for the skill's power. After a brief moment of dominance, Big Explosion immediately crushed Jet Flame backwards. Charizard was so utterly skeptical that when Big Explosion arrived again, it had no time to escape. Big Explosion struck Charizard solidly, sending it plummeting mid-air. Perhaps because Big Explosion's force was simply too immense, Charizard was still a bit dazed after being struck by Big Explosion. However, Moltres didn't give Charizard even a moment to react. Following suit with another attack, Moltres' figure flashed in mid-air, and when it reappeared, it was already beside Charizard. Because it was still completely unaware, and Moltres' attack was incredibly fast, Charizard was caught completely off guard and took a solid hit from Moltres' spinning attack. But did it think that was the end? It wasn't. Moltres knew from the previous battle that Charizard was a far more formidable opponent. Therefore, given the minimum it could withstand, it certainly wouldn't hold back. Its wings flapped repeatedly, leaving only a swath of air, gathering strength at a speed visible to all. Then, without a moment's hesitation, Charizard launched its attack. It landed heavily on the ground, and the pain from Moltres' spinning attack seemed to shake Charizard out of its daze. Now awake, Charizard would no longer succumb to Moltres' attacks. Facing the oncoming whirlwind blades, Charizard, still in pain, couldn't quickly spread its wings to escape or fly. But its reaction was also incredibly swift. Its dual attacks immediately emitted a flash of white light. It effortlessly unleashed one slashing move after another. The sound of collisions continued, and Charizard blocked each of the wind blades created by the whirlwind blade. However, as Charizard blocked them, and the blasts that had dispersed the whirlwind blade dissipated, a pillar of energy behind it grew larger and larger, eventually filling Charizard's pupils. This was undoubtedly Moltres' other skill, Primal Power. Faced with this sudden and even cunning primal force, Charizard had already reacted, but its body couldn't keep up. Relying on primal instinct, it unleashed a Dragon Claw, slashing at the energy beam coming from the west, hoping to completely shred it with its claws. It was unclear whether the energy beam's power was simply too overwhelming, or if Charizard itself wasn't exerting its full strength. The Dragon Claw and the beam of light formed by the original power collided fiercely. Chapter 850 Victory. Ouch! Faced with a powerful beam of primal energy, even though Charizard had already deployed its claws for defense, they still seemed vulnerable. Its claws intertwined to form a scissor-like shape, attempting to slice through the center and completely cleave the primal energy. But even the sharpest pair of scissors, when confronted with stone, will eventually break. This wasn't the case with the energy beam. Charizard's claws initially appeared incredibly powerful, nearly breaking the initial energy beam. However, the continuous flow of energy later on completely repaired the damage. The primal energy was so immense that even with Charizard's claws, which boasted immense combat and offensive power, the shockwave from the primal energy beam sent its claws repelling helplessly. Even as its claws were about to be repelled, Charizard desperately tried to salvage the situation, attempting to once again create a defensive barrier with its claws. However, the impact of the primal force and the energy surged so swiftly that Charizard had no chance to react. It was struck relentlessly, sending its entire body flying backwards. A deep drag mark was left on the ground. Dust and smoke suddenly rose in the air, obscuring the entire situation. Oh my god. This primal force is too powerful. This is a foul, Yu instinctively cursed, having never expected the power of the primal force to be so immense. But this wasn't the time for Yu to be surprised. It seemed that Charizard's continuous attacks had completely enraged it. Moltres showed no mercy, seeking to kill while it was weak. This was even more ruthless than Charizard's. As if fearing Charizard's quick reaction, Moltres ignored the fact that Charizard was still shrouded in smoke, making it impossible to see what was happening inside. It immediately unleashed its skill again, its figure flashing and reappearing within the smoke. A muffled thud echoed as a figure suddenly flew backwards from the smoke. It slid a distance across the ground before tumbling slightly and landing heavily. Who else could it be but Charizard? This Moltres is truly skilled. Yu couldn't help but sigh in amazement. It was simply impossible not to be amazed. Moltres' combo was truly beautiful. It was even more true to say that Moltres' timing was incredibly precise. Normally, Pokémon or trainers wouldn't dare to launch an attack rashly in the face of an unknown situation. Yet, even in this situation, Moltres dared to do so, and even succeeded. After all, aside from some exceptional Pokémon or trainers who could use their special abilities to locate their target even when their vision was obstructed, it was still quite difficult for anyone else to strike. Furthermore, what about situations like explosions and smoke that completely obstructed vision? Cunning trainers or Pokémon would often exploit the terrain's natural conditions in such situations. They'd set a trap while a Pokémon was pursuing, or perhaps recklessly charging in unprepared, leaving the Pokémon, presumably in control but completely unprepared, exposed to the other Pokémon sight. They could then exploit this opportunity to deliver a fatal blow to the unsuspecting Pokémon. Overall, however, Moltres' gamble paid off. It's unclear whether Moltres managed to completely destroy Charizard through sheer luck or sheer strength. And judging by the situation, Charizard was likely seriously injured. But it wasn't over yet. Even after Moltres inflicted more damage than Charizard had anticipated, Moltres acted as if he hadn't done anything yet, or perhaps wasn't satisfied with the damage he'd inflicted. A new wave of attacks followed, one after another. This time, compared to the previous continuous attacks, Charizard seemed completely shaken. No longer in a daze, even at the moment Moltres was about to attack, it seemed to suddenly wake up. A terrifying aura and golden light emanated from its eyes. Without hesitation, and unmindful of the pain radiating from its body, Charizard almost instantly leaped back to its feet, bracing itself for a counterattack. However, Charizard was caught off guard by Moltres' premeditated attack. Once again, it was powerless to retaliate, being thrown backwards with a heavy blow. The smoke, originally created by the intense battle, now completely enveloped the area engulfed by Charizard. For unknown reasons, a hole had appeared. From one side of the smoke, one could even see through the other, unobstructed. Oh my god, is this flamingo really that ruthless? First it's stationary, then it's a long-range attack. Is it trying to confuse everyone? You seem to have grasped Moltres' intentions. He was furious and yelled, but he felt helpless. Especially that solar beam attack just now, it practically pierced Charizard. Did you see Charizard now? It looked like it was struggling to get back up after falling to the ground. Although it struggled to support itself with its hands, trying to stand up again, it looked incredibly labored. Flame, I cried out again in a split second, like a proud victor mocking a weakling on the verge of defeat. It didn't launch the same swift and fierce attack as before, but instead completely unfurled its twin worlds and soared gracefully into the air. Its cry was incredibly harsh to the Pokémon at that moment. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.